of unequal pay for work of equal value, particularly in Nakuru, Busia, Kirinyaga, Garissa counties, and at the Kenyatta National Hospital, stating the rationale, if any, behind the decision. Number 2, address claims on the use of districtive contracts in Kirinyaga County, which hinder career progression, stating measures put in place by the government to ensure compliance with labor laws and industry standards. Number 3, evaluate the human resource management practices in county, healthcare facilities, particularly in Kirinyaga County, to address the high rate of attrition and turnover among healthcare workers. And number 4, recommend appropriate sanctions and measures against county governments found violating the labor laws and practicing discrimination in the employment of healthcare workers. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Chiranke.
A request for statement on malpractices and exploitation by Watu Credit. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism regarding alleged malpractices and exploitation of Kenyans by Watu Credit. In the statement, the committee should, 1, state the criteria, requirements, and standards that motor credit service providers and fintech companies must meet before they are fully registered and permitted to operate by the Central Bank of Kenya. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, clarify whether the Watu Credit is a duly registered motor creditor and if it falls under the regulatory purview of the Central Bank of Kenya, giving reasons for the highest interest rates charged by Watu Credit to its customers, leading clients to pay more than triple the market price for a motorbike. So, Speaker, number 3, explain the numerous cases reported concerning theft of motorbikes, specifically those whose owners have cleared their loans with Watu Credit. And finally, Mr. Speaker, cause Watu Credit to disclose its financial status, furnishing the details of all their customers currently servicing loans and those who have completed their payments since the company began its operation in motorbike lending loan, Mr. Speaker. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget regarding the status of pending bills in Vihiga County. In the statement, the committee should, 1, give a breakdown of pending bills in Vihiga County for the financial years 2014-2015 up to 2021-2022, stating the nature of the pending bill, the financial year when the pending bill was accrued, the total amount of the pending bill, the respective suppliers owed by the county government, and the reasons for the delay in paying the suppliers. 2, provide a list of all the processed and paid pending bills for the financial years 2014-2015 up to 2022-2023, stating the nature of the pending bill, the financial year the pending bill was paid, and the suppliers of goods and services paid. Number 3, Mr. Speaker, provide a list of all the pending payments on the internet banking, that is IB platform, for the current financial year, giving reasons for the inordinate delay in finalizing such payments. And 4, inform the Senate on how the county government of Vihiga has addressed audit queries relating to pending bills raised in the past Auditor General's report and the Senate reports. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, state the measures put in place to ensure timely payment of suppliers of goods and services in order to reduce or eliminate pending bills. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Godfrey Osotsi, Vihiga County.
Honorable Senators, kindly put your phones on silent mode so that you don't disrupt debate. Now, I'm going to allow limited comments on these statements for not more than 18 minutes, meaning we will have 3 from each side, 3 from the minority side and 3 from the majority side, each speaking for 3 minutes. Honorable Edwin Sifuna.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to very briefly support the statement that has been brought by Senator Godfrey Osotsi regarding the status of pending bills in his county. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, out of the over 350 billion shillings pending bills owed by county governments to various suppliers and institutions in this country, more than 100 billion of that amount is owed by Nairobi County alone. Mr. Speaker, as I was submitting to the House last week, I have been very encouraged by as a Senator of Nairobi that we have had certain discussions regarding some of those pending bills, especially those that were incurred by the Nairobi Metropolitan Services. And we were able to extract a concession from NMS, at least the Comptroller of State House, when he appeared before PAC, assured us that that money is not going to be appearing in the books of Nairobi anymore. So this is a problem. We have had certain submissions in public that now we are going to see timely disbursement of resources to counties in line with the disbursement schedule that we will pass as a House. I hope that that is going to be the solution to this question of pending bills in the country, Mr. Speaker. So I want to support this statement. I wish that the committee does a comprehensive job and, if possible, extends it to also the other counties. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mungatana. Majority Leader, you should lead by example, Majority Leader. Senator Cheriot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to quickly comment on the statement sought by the Honorable Senator Chimera on the status of recruitment of the Director General of the Competition Authority of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I have served and continue to serve in COMESA, Competition Authority, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Kenya is a highly respected member of competition authorities within the COMESA group of 21 countries. Mr. Speaker, it is very sad that since the end of the term of Francis Kariuki, the immediate former Director General, we have not had a quick succession or confirmation of the acting Director General on that position. Mr. Speaker, this has left the Competition Authority of Kenya in abeyance, and it's not functioning as it should, because the person who is seated there acting as the Director General is not able to focus and do the work that he's supposed to do. Mr. Speaker, this means mergers, acquisitions, and all things to do with competition law in Kenya and outside Kenya are suffering because of this. Mr. Speaker, I want to fully support this statement by Senator Chimera that action must be taken very quickly by the Public Service Commission so that this matter can be put to rest and so that Kenya can continue to shine at the continental level as it should, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to make a very quick comment on the repossession of motorbikes by our border communities. Mr. Speaker, just this weekend, we saw a number of these repossessors. Mr. Speaker, this statement by the Honorable Senator Cherarke is a very important one because, Mr. Speaker, when you look at it, the repossessors, they time the border operators. When you have 20,000, 25,000 remaining, they come for you, even if you've just missed one repayment. Mr. Speaker, you will find even in places like Tana River County, they actually come, they have those trackers, Mr. Speaker. Even if you hide it in the bushes, they will come for it. Mr. Speaker, I wonder what kind of people these are. Because looking at the price at which they purchase these motorcycles, it's really shameful the way these credit companies are operating. Mr. Speaker, I urge the Senate committee responsible to deal with this matter so that we can save our border young people from this harassment. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Ledama. Clerk, keep the timing at 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the statement, particularly on the issue of pending bills. Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no reason as to why each county should have a pending bill. If you look at the financial year of 2022-2023, county governments budgeted to spend money on their 30% for the development. Before the financial year ends, they carry out several supplementary budgets. And these supplementary budgets affects the budgeted amount for projects that have already been expensed. So, Mr. Speaker, in the statement, I'd like the committee to follow up to ensure how much of these pending bills have reached to internet banking. Because what is happening currently is that the accounting officers, those who approved the expenditures, are the ones who divert the money. And it is important that the Controller of Budget understands her role clearly, that she only releases money which she is convinced that it is going to pay a particular expense. So in that statement, I would like to request that the committee further examines the levels from all the 47 counties of the money which is diverted, which end up resulting into this issue of pending bills. Because pending bills, you will go to the IFMIS system. When it gets to IFMIS, you are told your bills are in IFMIS. But they never, at that point of IFMIS, is when the Controller of Budget releases the money. But now when it goes to the IB level for money to be sent to the vendors, the officers, the approvals, approval 1 and approval 2 in the county government are the ones who now divert that money, and they pay other expenditures which had not been budgeted for and had actually not been approved by the Controller of Budget. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that we must take seriously because there are so many pending bills. In fact, in this one financial year, not only Vihiga, every county, whatever they budgeted for, whatever money we send from this house, and ONSO's revenue, whatever amount they collected from the ground, if you put all that together and you look at the pending bills, with a fiduciary responsibility, all those bills should have been paid. But in this case, they divert the money so that they can get kickbacks. So, Mr. Speaker, I support that statement, and I hope we can get to the end of this cancer of pending bills.
Senator Chiriot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two comments. Number one is on the statement by Senator for Turkana, the one which Senator Boni Halwale tried to seek your indulgence. And I believe he has further been guided because he knows the procedure if he were to proceed the way in which he wanted the House to. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I believe this is a very important issue which, as the Senate of the Republic of Kenya, we cannot keep quiet. Mr. Speaker, you know that for a long time, actually since the inception of EAC as a regional bloc, Kenya has continued to play the big brother role. And for that tag of being the superpower of the region, we have suffered tremendously. Each time I see negotiations that happens at EAC level, the final straw that normally breaks the proverbial camel's back is this tag of, oh, you're the bigger brother, please bear with us. And on that account, Kenya has suffered great injustice on many actions. You know about Migingo, you know about the chicken in Narok County on their border with Tanzania, and now this particular issue, Mr. Speaker, that involves now human beings. You know, Mr. Speaker, it may reflect as a situation as when they first went for the fish, we kept quiet. Subsequently, they burnt our chicken.
Majority Leader, let me guide you. The comments you're supposed to make should be attributable to the statement made pursuant to Standing Order 53-1, not the statement made pursuant to Standing Order 52-1. And that's why when Senator Boni veered off to make his comments on that particular statement, I had to stop him. And I believe he was guided on what to do in the event that he wants the Senate to contribute to that motion. So also restrict yourself to the statements under 53-1.
Mr. Speaker, I'm properly guided, therefore I abandon that particular conversation, and to pick on the second statement by Senator Samson Cherargei, which I believe we are at liberty, at least for that particular one, Mr. Speaker, to decide. And you know that the number of these companies that are doing this kind of business, Mr. Speaker, is predominantly long, Mr. Speaker. And we know for a fact that 99.9% of these companies are not locally owned. They are owned by foreigners. Therefore, this is neo-colonialism, but a very difficult one, Mr. Speaker, because young people are breaking their back, working in either extreme cold or a lot of sunshine. And then eventually all that money that they have made, if you make 2,000 shillings in a day, 1,800 is taken and offsetted out of the country, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, this is not a small matter. I hope that the cabinet secretary responsible will come. These are such businesses that are of great national interest, Mr. Speaker, that as Parliament, we should legislate even to keep them within the confines of the country. That if you want to do this kind of business, you must at least have significant shareholding locally. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I hope that we will get to the bottom of this matter and ensure that people stop taking advantage of our young boys and girls plying the border business. I thank you.
Senator Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to make comments on the Week of Youth, Mr. Speaker, as done by Senator Elsie. And Mr. Speaker, the issue of youth, which is now being celebrated all over the world, is a very critical issue, and I like that.
Senator Manzo, again, restrict your comments to the statement made pursuant to Standing Order 53. The statement by Senator AC was made pursuant to Standing Order 52.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Then the next statement I'm dealing with is one by Senator Beatrice Ogola. Mr. Speaker, this particular one dealt with teen pregnancies. And again, is a very sensitive issue in the country. Mr. Speaker, there are rising cases in the counties of teen pregnancies whereby families are attempting to resolve the matter other than letting it go to court or other than letting the police handle such cases whereby in a lot of situations amounts to abuse of people under the age of 18, and the law is very serious about it to protect them. The statement goes on to come up with a policy or for this House, Mr. Speaker, to be able to strengthen the way in which we should enforce the current law, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that there is sufficient protection of our children so that they may have a future and that they may end up schooling and preparing for their future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this has been abandoned county by county, and the role of police, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, kindly let's have order. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The role of police and the role children officers, Mr. Speaker, has been diluted, and for that matter, there's a responsibility from community to community to make sure that there is protection of young children, and that in the event teenage pregnancies happen, then these children should be rehabilitated and go back to school so that they may have a chance in life. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Boni. Proceed to the bar, bow and take your seat and comment on these statements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to limit my comment to the contribution, the statement on pending bills by the Senator of Vihiga. Mr. Speaker, let the country be reminded that the government has cleared all the arrears owed to county governments. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the money due for the new financial year 2023-2024 for July has been paid. The only reason why a governor was going to fail to pay a creditor through a pending bill is because they had no money. Mr. Speaker, this committee should make it simple. You write a letter to all the 47 governors so that they bring you a return that they have paid all the pending bills in the country because they are not owed any money by the national government. Allow Mr. Speaker to laud the governor of Bungoma. Senator Lusaka is the only governor who has decided to clear all the bills. There is no noise in Bungoma. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have expended the 18 minutes that we had allocated to this. We shall therefore move to the next order. Clerk, next order. Statements pursuant to Standing Order 56-1. But honorable senators, we have a division in the form of Order 11. And I'm informed we do have the requisite delegations to conduct a division. I will therefore wish to rearrange the sequence of the order paper before senators walk out to attend to other businesses. So we will pen the statement pursuant to Standing Order 56 and rearrange the order paper in the following manner. We will straight away move to Order 11 and proceed to do division, and then we will come back to the order paper as presented to us today. So clerk, kindly proceed to call that particular order.
Order number 11, motion, adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the county government's equitable share cash disbursement schedule for the financial year 2023-2024 and approval of the county government's equitable share cash disbursement schedule for the financial year 2023-2024. Division.
Sergeant at Arms, kindly proceed to ring the division bell for 5 minutes. Sergeant at Arms, kindly proceed to close the doors and draw the bar. Senator Chuta, Senator Sigay, kindly take your seat so that we get down to this business. Now, honorable senators, I proceed to put the question that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the county government, into brackets, equitable share, cash disbursement schedule for the financial year 2023-2024, laid on the table of the Senate on Thursday, 27th July 2023, and that pursuant to Section 17(7) of the Public Finance Management Act and Standing Order 189.3, the Senate approves the county government's equitable share cash disbursement schedule for financial year 2023-2024. Now, voting will be done electronically, and therefore, at this juncture, I will ask all senators to log out. Just log out. The Sergeant at Arms, kindly proceed to pick the cards that are still remaining in the delegate unit. And once you're done with that, kindly signal me. Sergeant at Arms? Good. Now, honorable senators, you can log back into the delegate unit. Senator Mazayo, you are always in the wrong spot whenever we are doing. You may proceed to. So once you've logged back into the delegate unit, you may now proceed to vote by pressing yes, no, or abstain. Senator Chirangei. Just reminding you that we are still very much in session. Now, honorable senators, the results for the division are now in. The ayes 28, noes 0, abstentions 0. So the ayes have it. Sergeant at arms, you may now open the door and withdraw the bar. So, honorable senators, we will pick it up from where we were before we rearrange the sequence of the order paper. That is statement pursuant to Standing Order 56-1B. The chairperson, County Public Investment and Special Funds.
Mr. Speaker, wish to make a statement relating to the activities of the County Public Investments and Special Funds Committee made pursuant to Standing Order number 56-1B for the period between 15th April 2023 to 30th June 2023. Honorable Speakers, during the period under review, the committee held a total of 34 meetings in which it considered the reports of the Auditor General on the financial statements of county-owned water companies and the matter of non-remittance of pension deduction by entities in counties. Considerations of the report of the Auditor General on the financial statement of county-owned water companies. In this case, Mr. Speaker, During the same period, the committee continued to pay a close attention to water companies in counties as they formed a significant part of their public investment. They were also noted to have numerous financial and governance issues, among other issues. In that financial years of interest, Mr. Speaker, the committee invited respective governors to appear before it to respond to the issues raised by the Auditor General, and the counties were Nandi County, in relation to Kapsabet, Nandi Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Migori in relation to Migori County Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Kilifi in relation to two water companies, that's Malindi Water and Sewerage Company Limited, Kilifi Mariakani Water and Sewerage Company Limited, Machakos in relation to two water companies, that is Matungulu Kangundo Water and Sewerage Company Limited, and Machakos Water and Sewerage Company Limited. Kirinyaga in relation to Kirinyaga Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Taveta in relation to Tavevo Water and Sewerage Company Limited, Wajir in relation to Wajir Water and Sewerage Company Limited, Nairobi in relation to Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company Limited, Garissa in relation to Garissa Water and Sewerage Company Limited, Muranga in relation to 4 water companies, that is Muranga Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Muranga South Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Gatanga Community Water Scheme, Kahuti Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Trans Nzoia in relation to Nzoia Water Service Company Limited, Mombasa in relation to Mombasa Water Supply and Sanitation Company Limited, Turkana in relation to Lodwar Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Kitui in relation to Kitui Water and Sanitation Company Limited. Honorable Speaker, other than the meeting with the water companies, the committee also held meetings with the Water and Sanitation Providers Association, WASPA, Water Services Regulatory Board, WASREB, the National Treasury, among others, to deliberate on various matters under the committee purview. In the process of considering the above-mentioned county entities, the committee observed the following key cross-cutting issues that adversely affects the operation of water entities. Number one, Mr. Speaker, was management challenges. Some water companies operated for several years without board of directors, Mr. Speaker, a situation that the committee thought adversely affected the decision-making processes. For example, Mr. Speaker, the Lodwar Water and Sanitation Company Limited had not established a substantive board of directors since inception of devolution. The other challenge, Mr. Speaker, was financial challenges. Most water companies, Mr. Speaker, reported negative working capital during the period under review. Hence, they were not able to meet the short-term and long-term financial obligation as they fell due and relied on financial support from the county government or development agencies, raising concerns on their sustainability and commercial viability. For instance, Mr. Speaker, Mombasa Water Supply and Sanitation Company Limited had a negative working capital of 1,464,597,678 as at 30th June 2021. The negative liquidity, Mr. Speaker, meant that the company was in undesirable and precarious financial position. The other major challenge, Mr. Speaker, was non-revenue water. All water companies that we interrogated, Mr. Speaker, within that period had non-revenue water that exceeded the sector benchmark of 25% as prescribed by WASREB and international best practice. And this, Mr. Speaker, was attributed to losses resulting from dilapidated infrastructure, what we refer to as physical losses, and inaccurate meter reading and billing, that is commercial losses. For instance, Mr. Speaker, Wajir Water and Sewerage Company Limited had a non-revenue water of 82% for the financial year 2020-2021, which was the highest under our review. Mr. Speaker, the other challenge was non-transfer of assets and liability. Most water companies, Mr. Speaker, had not fully transferred all assets and liability from the different councils or regional water works development agencies as required by the Water Act 2016. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, such water companies did not reflect the correct financial position within their books of accounts. Mr. Speaker, the other challenge was the ownership challenges. The committee noted that numerous county governments were yet to take full ownership of water companies within their counties, in line with the Water Act 2016. For example, Mr. Speaker, Murang'a County had 5 licensed water service providers, but only one was fully owned by the county government. Lodwar Water and Sanitation Company Limited, Mr. Speaker, in Turkana had not been transferred from the different local authorities to the county government of Turkana. Further, 40% of the water companies were owned, 40% of the water company, that is Turkana, Lodwar, was owned by a private entity. Honorable Speaker, to mitigate the above issues, the committee made several interim recommendations specific to each county for immediate implementation. And this touched on, 1, Mr. Speaker, restructuring of the board of directors and the constitution of new one. And Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the committee for having ensured that companies that did not have board, they now have boards. And most counties are in the process of having a proper board of directors as per the law. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, governors to take keen interest in the management and operation of water companies within their counties in line with Article 179 of the Constitution. Number 3, water companies to put in place comprehensive measures to tackle non-revenue water that is both physical and commercial. Number 4, Mr. Speaker, governors in collaboration with the Intergovernmental Relation Technical Committee, IGRTC, to ensure all assets are transferred in favor of water companies. Number 5, Mr. Speaker, county government to take full ownership of water companies within their counties in line with the Water Act 2016. Honorable Speaker, I'm happy to report that the committee has made numerous achievements while executing its oversight mandate. For example, Mr. Speaker, through the committee intervention, the county government of Murang'a, for instance, was able to take full ownership of all the 5 water companies, a matter that had been unresolved for 10 years. Consideration of the matter of non-remittance of pension deduction by entities in the county. Honorable Speaker, while interrogating the audit report for water company, the committee noted non-remittance of pension deduction by county entities remained rampant. Consequently, the committee resolved to conduct an inquiry into the matter and has so far engaged various stakeholders, including the National Treasury, Controller of Budget, the Local Authorities Trust Fund, commonly referred to as LAB Trust, the Local Authority Provident Fund, commonly referred to LAB Fund, and the Council of Governors, among others. The challenges encountered, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Speaker, the committee encountered the following challenges while reviewing this matter. One was that the counties actually owe pensioners in the range of 80 billion shillings, money that has not been paid to pension scheme. Mr. Speaker, this matter, we are following it very closely, and this week, on Friday, we have an engagement, a joint retreat between the committee and the National Treasury, which we have called all the stakeholders to address this matter of pension funds owed to LAB Fund and LAB Trust. Honorable Speaker, the committee encountered the following challenges while executing its mandate. One, numerous requests for rescheduling of meetings by invited witnesses, hence adversely affecting the committee work plan. Two, failure to honor invitation by invited guests without valid reasons. Three, late submission or failure to submit required documents by invited witnesses. And four, numerous changes in the committee meeting venue. Way forward, Mr. Speaker, as I come to close, Honorable Speaker, in dealing with the above challenges, the committee declined more than 2 consecutive requests for rescheduling of meetings. The committee also reminds invited guests the provisions of Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act on the failure to honor invitation without reasonable cause, as well as failure to submit document. And in this case, Mr. Speaker, we have issued summons to 2 governors. We issued summons to the governor of Nakuru, Honorable Susan Kiika, and yesterday we issued a summons to the governor of Kiambu, Honorable Wamatangi, who is the former senator. The future, Mr. Speaker, on the matter of inquiry into non-remittance of pension deduction by counties, the committee is scheduled to hold a final multi-stakeholder forum this Friday with the relevant stakeholder led by the National Treasury with the aim of resolving this matter. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, the committee is scheduled to have a consultative meeting with the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation with the 9 regional waterworks development agencies and Water Sector Trust Fund to deliberate on the issue of transfer of assets and liabilities to county government, and also look at the various provisions in the Water Act which impede devolution. 3, Mr. Speaker, the committee plans to conduct field visit to various counties. Priority will be given to the investment that are facing huge fiduciary risks. The committee is also in the process of preparing its report for tabling. I want to report that we have so far done more than 10 reports which are going to be tabled in due course. The Honorable Speaker, the committee is also scheduled to commence its interrogation of the auditor's reports on the financial statement of funds within the counties with effect from the month of September. Mr. Speaker, allow me to congratulate my committee for the commitment, for the teamwork in ensuring that this committee remains very active. And I want to say this committee has done a wonderful job in positioning the role of Senate in as far as issues of accountability and transparency in water companies in the county is involved. With these few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I submit. Thank you.
The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation. The chairperson is not present. Okay, then this will be dealt with tomorrow because actually the Secretariat is yet to receive that report. Now, honorable senators, indeed I'm aware that pursuant to Standing Order 56.3, I may allow senators to comment on these statements for not more than 20 minutes. And therefore, I'm going to pick two from each side to speak for 3 minutes each so that we move to the next agenda. Senator Eddy. Yes, Senator Maruma.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't want really to vary your guidance, but you know, public accounts and public investments do most of the bulk of the work in oversighting our counties. I really wish, because some of our counties were involved and appeared before the committee, maybe you do slightly more. Because there are really germane issues that you need to address from the feedback of the report that is given. I would really wish that we give us slightly more members, me included. Thank you, Chair.
Let's see how it goes. Senator Eddy, please. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. I've actually missed this dispatch for the last 3 months that I've been sick, and I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the great support you've offered me during the last 3 months. I also want to thank colleagues who have really been supportive, including my captain, Senator Arun Cheriot. Whenever he gets to the house, he comes and checks on me this other side. And above all, I also want to thank colleagues from this other side who have also been able to check on me even in the House. But that said, Mr. Speaker, I want to, first of all, congratulate and really commend Senator Osotsi for being a great leader. I'm a member of this committee, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate the functionality of Standing Order number 194 that initiated this committee. Because the first thing that I've realized, Mr. Speaker, up and above the substantive issues that the Honorable Senator, Chair of this particular committee has presented, is the fact that we have serious backlog in terms of looking at the investments that are in our counties. And Mr. Speaker, this has really contributed to why service provision is very difficult in our counties, Mr. Speaker. And alongside that, Mr. Speaker, one thing that the examination of the water companies in our counties has actually exposed to us is the idea of integrated development. And I wanted to give feedback with the issue of non-revenue water, Mr. Speaker. When we were examining the issue of non-revenue water in this committee, we ended up realizing that we actually were able to, more and more as we went through the committee, we were actually able to articulate that actually non-revenue water emerges from donation of water, 1, and then 2, physical losses, and then 3, commercial losses. And we are realizing, Mr. Speaker, that the physical losses, which actually ended up comprising the highest number of non-revenue water in the counties, Mr. Speaker, was due to a lot of dilapidated pipes that are being affected by massive construction that are going on in the county, Mr. Speaker. And you can imagine if this is what is happening in the counties where one department that is dealing with water is rectifying water in the counties or even nationally, and then departments that are dealing with roads in these counties are also coming to affect the same places where these pipes are passing, Mr. Speaker, then becomes an endemic problem for provision of water and sanitation in this country, Mr. Speaker. So I want just to comment on that aspect, that can we be able to have a way that we can be able to feedback both national bodies as well as local bodies, especially in the counties, so that we have an integrated development plan that looks into these issues and help these counties grow. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I hope that this committee will continue.
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I want to comment on our counterpart committee, County Public Investment Committee. I think in this session, Mr. Speaker, this is the first time that we have separated county public accounts. Mine are two observations, Mr. Speaker, sir, is on the running of water companies. Most of the water companies are under, most of them are underperforming, and I think the major reason, Mr. Speaker, is on non-revenue water. I think they need to improve in collecting water, because, Mr. Speaker, under Article 43, water is life. There is access to water. But the goodness, I'm happy under William Ruto's government, the intention of developing dams, Mr. Speaker, including Keben Dam in Nandi County, Posta Dam, Itare Dam, Karmenu, Thipa, Twake, among other areas, Mr. Speaker, and even in northern part where Senator Chute comes from in Marsabit, Mr. Speaker, is that there will be many dams that will ensure each and every, Mr. Speaker, water is available to Kenyans. Even when you look at aquifer water, also the presence of aquifer water, Mr. Speaker, in Turkana, we need to exploit. But my point is that we need to improve. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, the second observation we made, especially in Eldowas and Kapsabet Water Company, is non-revenue water, where they are yet to automate the collection of water, water tariffs and water levies across Nandi. Nandi, we still have a big challenge. We believe by construction of Keben Dam, Mr. Speaker, sir, it will allow us to get a lot of funds and money. Mr. Speaker, the third point is I want to request the committee as a future to assist us in developing these water works. Because where I come from, we are under Lake Victoria Water Node Services. Yet the headquarters and assets are all of them based in Kakamega, Mr. Speaker. Is it possible to create counties that have some particular cultural and thinking to be in one waterworks? Because as our assets are being controlled at Kakamega, sometimes they take vehicles, meters, Mr. Speaker, is it possible, and even our money, Mr. Speaker, under CSR that is given to Lake Victoria Water Works, when you go to Lake Victoria Water Works in Kakamega, they have employed one ethnic group, Mr. Speaker, apparently from where Senator Utsotsi comes from and Senator Boni Khalwale. Yet the huge chunk, Mr. Speaker, comes from Nandi County and part of Uasin Gishu County, Mr. Speaker. Is it possible for the CPIC to push to ensure if we have waterworks, we have waterworks that controls at a peculiar? Mr. Speaker, the biggest challenge also is in Nairobi, Water and Sanitation Company. Mr. Speaker, can you believe most of these water companies do not have a substantive CEO and chair because of the conflict of interest of running of billions of shillings? I request that most of these water companies are being run, Mr. Speaker, without substantive heads, without functioning boards, Mr. Speaker. Can the CPIC step in and stabilize most of the boards to ensure we have substantive chair and, Mr. Speaker, and others? Mr. Speaker, finally, on the special funds, I didn't get anything apart from the funds of Lab Trust and Lab Fund on the bursary fund, on the emergency funds that are being... Mr. Speaker, can you believe counties spend emergency funds before even an emergency happens? Especially through sodas, chai, and mandasi. So, Mr. Speaker, we...
Senator Mwaruma.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to comment about the report by the Chair, County Public Investments and Special Funds. Actually, I would like to thank the Senate because of seeing it fit to divide the committee into public investments and public accounts, because, Mr. Speaker, for the last many years, we have not been having the Senate do oversight on the public investments, including the water companies special funds like the car and mortgage funds and so on. So I think that is something that we need to laud ourselves on. I would like to comment specifically, Chair, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of debts. My county is one of the counties that has a very big debt of over 450 million. During the meeting, or when our county came, the county company is called Tavevo, we have found that the debt has gone out to 451 million. That debt, of course, there's some some money lost because of lack of collection of the revenue through pilferage, but most of the money is lost through non-revenue water, Mr. Speaker. It is within our knowledge that because of non-revenue water, due to dilapidated infrastructure, we have even the government has gone into implementing a new pipeline called Mzima 2 pipeline. So my question I have been asking is, why is it that we have to owe this money to counties, yet that water is non-revenue water lost due to dilapidated infrastructure, Mr. Speaker? Right now, when you had the CS some 2 weeks ago, she did say that Mzima 1 was meant to supply 40,000 cubic meters of water per day. But right now, it is supplying 32,000 cubic meters. So I would like to urge the chair, CPIC, that we need to write off, look for a way of writing off the historical debts. That is number one, Mr. Speaker, because then the debts are not due to the making of the county governments. And sometimes water supply is disconnected due to those debts. Number two, and very important, Mr. Speaker, is non-remittance of pensions to the schemes. I have a statement, I think it's coming up tomorrow, about non-remittance of employees' pension funds to their schemes. That's really grievous. We've been given a figure of 80 billion, and you can't sit pretty as a Senate. And we know that money is not being remitted. People who have worked for very many years and their money is not remitted to the pension funds. That is the LAP Trust and the LAP Fund and so on. So I would like to be enjoined, if possible, on Friday.
Senator, your time is up. Senator Seki.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also want to add my voice to this statement under the Committee of CPIC and support that it is true that we have a lot of problems in the counties, particularly in these companies, water companies. I want to take this challenge even to part of our, my county where we have quite a number of problems. And I happen to attend these discussions, particularly with the committee. And we found that there are quite a number of issues as addressed by the senator, particularly on issues of boards, issues of assets, issues of debts, as indicated by the chair of the committee. And these are issues that can be the county can avoid, particularly on the issues of boards. I found that most of the governors, particularly as executive of counties, they are unable to appoint board of management in these water companies. So it is something that brings a very big issue, particularly on issues of executive, and I think it is something that can be avoided. The boards makes decisions to the water companies, but we have a very big problem. We found that in Kajiado County we have 3 water companies, particularly that is Nolturesh Water Company, Olkejuado Water Company, and Lolaisa Water Company. But I think the committee only handled the issue of Olkejuado Water Company. We are still yet to wait for 2 companies to be handled. And I want to say that this issue of assets transfers is something that county governments can do this and fast track this issue of assets transfers with water companies because it is under their obligation. On issues of debts, that is non-remittance of pension fund, it is something that I don't know why the county governments are keeping this money. These are money that are deducted to employees because most of the companies have transferred staff. So I think we want to support this statement, and we want to give more support to the chair and even request him to do more for those water companies that have not yet been handled by his.
Senator Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me contribute to the statement by the chair of CIPIC, Senator Osotsi. Let me also confirm that I'm vice chair of CIPIC. A lot of work has been done so far, I think, for counting the 3 years, because we've been doing audit reports from 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2018. We have done almost 10 counties. That means about 30 reports. A lot of work has gone into this process, Mr. Speaker, sir. And let me confirm that most of the challenges, as Chair has echoed, arises from the fact that some of the counties have been unable to completely own these companies. And one of the recommendations, Mr. Speaker, sir, that runs across the board is the involvement of the IGTRC to ensure that most of these companies transition from the previous county councils or from the previous water boards that we had to the current framework where counties now own. Mr. Speaker, sir, we're all aware of the change in the law. We have the waterworks that have taken over the work of the previous work of the boards. And my learned friend, Senator Cherargei, Senator Fonandi, has raised questions about jurisdiction of, for instance, Lake Victoria Water South and North, which previously control companies from different counties. I think the waterworks, and I think the concern across the board has been that the water service providers, or WSPs, which are the companies, are providing services or are dealing with loans that are taken by the waterworks or the previous boards. So loans are taken and you do not know what activities they're going to. Assets are developed for you and you pay the loans which you don't take. I think that is a concern that we've had with most of the waterworks. Previously, the boards, loans were taken from ADB and the water service providers have to repay those loans. I think that is one area that has to be tidied up. Mr. Speaker, sir, on the other funds, Senator Fernandez has raised the concerns about other funds. We have just started with the water sector. And most of these counties have now domesticated. They have their own water acts or water statutes under the framework of Water Act 2016. And I think that's a good move for most of the counties. The ones where we have a multiplicity of companies, including Kajiado, are in the process of seeing the possibility of having one effective water company, or at least two companies, so that we are able to audit these companies with ease, and and we are able to audit companies that actually deliver to the people of those counties. Mr. Speaker, sir, we will in due course audit the other funds. There are many funds like special funds that have previously been unaudited. For instance, fire education funds, special loans funds, mortgage funds, and I think all these funds will eventually be audited. We are doing audits for 3 years at a time, and I think the creation of this committee, Mr. Speaker, sir, was timers. It will help the question of accountability for our counties. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Kisang.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to the statement by the chair of the CIPIC. Honorable Speaker, we want to thank the 12th Parliament, the 3rd Senate, in its wisdom to split CIPAC and CIPIC, because for the last 9 years, Honorable Speaker, CPIC in the last Senate did not audit special funds and investments in the counties. That's why we have, as a committee, a lot of backlog. We have dealt with about 3 financial years for close to 40 counties, and basically in the course of this month of August, we should be finishing. Honorable Speaker, from what we've seen from the water companies, technically 90%, over 90% of these companies are technically insolvent. They are not able to run on their own because of so many things: inefficiencies, corruption, incompetence, lack of capacity for the staff. Because, Honorable Speaker, most of the water companies, they were run as if they were independent from the county governments. But at least now that we have met with the governors, they have known that they are in charge, they are in control of these particular water entities. And most of them have even reconstituted the boards, because in the past, some of the board of directors ran as if they're independent. When the governors wanted to restructure, some of them even went to court to stop the governors from reconstituting the boards of the water companies. Honorable Speaker, on the non-revenue water, from what my colleagues have said, actually all of them did not meet the allowable threshold of 25%. I think it's only one county that met it, but others were as high as 82, because of some of them said they donated a lot of water during coffee time. Others, basically because of dilapidated pipelines, inefficiencies, they don't have meters. Some sell water as bulk, charging just a flat rate of 1,000 bob, regardless of how much water you consume. So I believe with the measures that they've been put and they've been advised by both the committee and also the Ministry of Water, basically the water companies will turn around and make surplus instead of relying on the county governments. Some of them actually are getting grants to run. Otherwise, most of them are unable to even pay their own salaries. Honorable Speaker, finally, on assets, what's REP and the waterworks in the region? In fact, we are thinking it might not be necessary to even have the waterworks, because these waterworks, they have given some of the water companies, they own some assets, and the assets are not transferred to the water companies.
Senator Kavindu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to support this report by the CPIC chair. Mr. Speaker, it is true what he has read, because recently we appeared with my governor and some of the water companies before his committee, and the issue is that most of these companies are really misusing the funds from the water, and even the deposits that people pay so that they can be reconnected water from the source to their homes. They misuse everything, and people cannot even get water, and the revenue, they don't even account. Mr. Speaker, like my county, my governor wants to change the companies and have only one company or two which can be accountable and which can supply water effectively to the people and be accountable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I support this statement.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I think I want to also support the committee for the good work they have done. Actually, I'm impressed that the committee of CPIC is actually doing a very good job, that they're moving, the backlog is actually being reduced. However, Honourable Speaker, I think there's a lot of, lack of some information in the county issues, especially in the water sector. In my county, as mentioned in the report, actually the Wajir Water Service Company has a lot of fundings from World Bank. However, the same money is not actually accounted for, and it does not come through the assemblies, the county assembly to oversight. Most of the grants that have been received is actually not, it's only audited by the Auditor General, and it takes too long for that money to be audited, accounted for. The company actually has been used to employ, many staff, and the company was only able to support less than 100 staff. And therefore, I think we need to oversight those things properly. One other thing is actually the statutory reductions. Mr. Speaker, pay as you earn, NHF is actually meant for the staff. And it's their own money that they deducted. But this money is not remitted to the respective organizations, like KRA, NHF, and HF. At times, even the members cannot be able to treat their own relatives, the families, their children, and themselves. Sometimes when they feel sick, they don't even have the money. So I think these things, the certain reductions must be compelled. They must be submitted in time. One other thing, Honorable Speaker, is that the counties now are more or less relying so much on the equitable shares only. Their own resource, there's a lot of money actually within the counties. But that money is not actually, they don't put much effort, and the money is not collected, or it's collected but not accounted for. Two, in the water works and water companies, water agencies, water functions for water is devolved. And so many water agencies and the service board is holding and getting a lot of money from the exchequer. I think it's the high time that this Senate must move fast so that we can all push the national government to at least take all the devolved sanctions from these water service boards to the counties. Because at times, there's an implication of work. You see the county doing some dams, the boreholes, and then the same water works are also doing the same job. That money can be taken to the counties, so at least.
Honourable Senators, before we move to the next order, I would like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon, visiting teachers and students from Machani Mingi Secondary School. The group comprises 6 teachers and 41 students who are in the Senate for a one-day academic exposition. Honourable Senators, in our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. Majority Leader, under 1 minute. Kindly welcome the students and teachers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the Senate to welcome the visiting students and teachers from Machani Mingi Secondary School in Nakuru County, a neighboring county not far from where I come from, Mr. Speaker. I hope and do believe that these young children will get the full value for the time that they have taken to visit with this house. This has been a very eventful afternoon with many reports being presented. I've seen motions being processed. And in the next few minutes, Mr. Speaker, they will see even a bill being moved by none other than the Majority Leader. It's not on every afternoon that you get to have a spice of everything that happens in Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I hope that they will get to enjoy, be inspired as they prepare to take on the baton of leadership from the current generation that is before this House, because it is for them that we are trying to make this country better. And once they get it, Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that they'll make it better than what we will have handed over to them. So to these students, on behalf of your Senator, Senator Tabitha Karanja Keroche, who's out of the Senate today on other engagements, I do welcome you to the Senate and wish you a fruitful stay. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next order, Clerk.
Order number 8, the Maternal, Newborn and Child Health Bill, Senate Bills number 17 of 2023, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to provide for a coordinated system for the provision of quality maternal, newborn and child health services, to provide for response to maternal and child morbidity and mortality in the country, to provide for a healthcare system that facilitates the attainment of health rights for the mother and child, and for connected purposes.
Next order.
Order number 9, the County Hall of Fame Bill, Senate Bills number 18 of 2023, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to establish a county hall of fame in each county as an avenue through which the county governments shall bestow honor on individuals within their respective counties acclaimed as being outstanding, exceptional, or illustrious in any profession or activity. Provide a framework for the preservation of the history, heritage, and culture of counties and for connected purposes. Order number 10, the Rise Bill, Senate Bills number 19 of 2023, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to provide for the development, regulation, and promotion of the rice industry, to provide for the establishment, powers, and functions of the Kenya Rice Board, and for connected purposes.
Next order.
Order number 12, the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bills number 16 of 2023, second reading.
The Majority Leader. You can proceed to table the report and then move.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I needed that guidance. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the Senate. This is a report of our committee, the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget and Public Finance Management Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 16 of 2023. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this chance. Mr. Speaker, this is pretty much a straightforward bill that has been ably considered by our Committee on Budget and Finance that touches on a very important discussion that's going on in our country. And I want to congratulate and appreciate the diligence, actually, of all the 11 members, or 9 actually, sorry, members of the Senate Budget and Finance Committee, Senator Roba, Tabitha Mutinda, Boni Halwale, Joyce, Tabitha Keroche, Senator Faki Munyehaji, Richard Onyonka, Shakila Abdallah, and Eddie Okech. I know how hard it is to be a member of Budget and Finance Committee. I served there.
Leader, let me just guide you for purposes of proper procedure. Kindly move the bill for the second reading. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I think because of the very unfamiliar things that we did of tabling and moving. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill, number 16 of 2023, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, sir, I resume from where I was previously by making comments that I appreciate the diligence and the hard work that it takes to serve in Budget and Finance Committee. I make no light of the work that all our other committees do. But, Mr. Speaker, I say this with utmost good faith, that it takes a senator of great discipline and dedication to the work of this House to serve in this particular committee. Because on many occasions, Mr. Speaker, you know, if it is a BPS, it's laid on this House, and you're told within 14 days, you need to have considered it, listen to the reports of all the other committees, and table your own report within 14 days to this House. Immediately after we move to the budget cycle again, Mr. Speaker, that commences immediately after the beginning of a financial year. And these colleagues of ours have to churn out reports. We've just concluded on the cash disbursement schedule, Mr. Speaker, which we are told actually we are out of time. We should have made that consideration, Mr. Speaker. But you know for a fact that the timelines fell when we were on recess, and therefore I appreciate the work that this committee has done. Mr. Speaker, this bill was introduced in the National Assembly as a National Assembly Bill number 16 with a sole intention, Mr. Speaker, of amending certain provisions of the PFM Act of Parliament that gets, I think this is the most amended Act of Parliament in the history of Parliament. Every other financial year, something keeps on coming up And therefore, Mr. Speaker, perhaps we need to come up with a proposal on how perhaps the reason why people continue to violate the PFM Act, Mr. Speaker, is because it keeps on changing so quickly that they don't even follow through, or many people don't get the time to appreciate and understand its provisions. That is not to make excuse, Mr. Speaker, for any accounting officer that they can get the clip of the majority leader of the Senate speaking and say that you can see even the majority leader has acknowledged that because of the many changes they make to PFM, it's hard to stick or follow through with the regulations. As good public servants, we expect of them to be kept abreast with all the happenings in Parliament, as such that when we conclude on any amendment, they are able to read and follow through. Mr. Speaker, from the chair persons forward, I do appreciate that quite a number of stakeholders actually appeared before this committee to make their submissions: the National Treasury, the Council of Governors, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, that's ISPAC, International Budget Partnership Kenya, very important stakeholders that over the years, I think these are among stakeholders that always appear whenever there's any item before the Budget and Finance Committee. I forget the name of their director, is Dr. Somebody, a small-bodied gentleman, but greatly patriotic and loves this country and appears each time that there are matters before the Senate to come and make their contribution. Last but not least is the CRA, which by and large, in my first stint at the committee, Mr. Speaker, we actually had a dedicated chair for the CRA chair, because it's impossible as Budget and Finance to consider any matter without CRA to come and to make their presentations, and on many occasions, they never fail us. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I do follow through with the proposals that have been made. Excuse me. I forgot some of my notes, Mr. Speaker, and just want to go close by close in quick succession, because this is a fairly straightforward bill, about 2 or 3 pages only. That this bill, Mr. Speaker, seeks to amend the following clauses: PFM Act number 18 of 2012, to operationalize the public debt and borrowing policy, Mr. Speaker, with regards to the framework for monitoring the level of public debt, and align it with provisions of Article 214.2 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which defines public debt to mean all financial obligations attendant to the loans raised or guaranteed securities or guaranteed by the national government. This is an important conversation, Mr. Speaker, because you know, and I wish Senator Mtata was here, because I know out there he's been quite vocal about this conversation of the need for us to rethink and perhaps have a better conversation on how we keep our debt stockpile, how we report, what framework we can create as the legislative body, so that at any given time, Mr. Speaker, we as a country know what is the value of the debt that Kenya owes to any lenders, actually, be they domestic or foreign. And I know that we are greatly in need of this particular policy, Mr. Speaker, monitoring public debt borrowing policy framework, Mr. Speaker, because I know that 2 years ago, before this House, as a member of Budget and Finance Committee, then CS for Treasury appeared before us one afternoon. I don't remember the exact legislation that we were considering, but when we insisted that he present us with an accurate reporting mechanism of what is it that Kenya owes its lenders, Mr. Speaker, we were presented by an Excel document, an Excel spreadsheet, and told that that is the only register that can be maintained, Mr. Speaker. And that points out to the challenge that we continue. In fact, to be sincere, Mr. Speaker, this legislation on its own is not enough. It is not sustainable to actually cure that malady in terms of reporting. If today Kenyans wanted to visit a specific either website or government office where they will get an accurate representation of the amounts of money that we owe our lenders, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid you will struggle around Harambee Avenue until you go back home without an accurate figure of what the exact amount is. And therefore, that this act is beginning to direct us towards the preparation of a framework to guide that particular process is important. But I still feel, Mr. Speaker, that as Parliament, that is both us and the lower house, Mr. Speaker, we need to move further than just creating the framework. We must provide the reporting mechanism, Mr. Speaker, for every lending that the country incurs to be reported in an open mechanism, the justification for the same provided, Mr. Speaker, and in an open way, because I know this conversation, and I've watched people present before television screens, including senators sometimes, that actually part of the debt that we are paying cannot be accounted for, that some of it, there is a possibility that it never even found its way to this House. That's a serious indictment of us as a House of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that by creating this Parliament, when we, this framework, Mr. Speaker, when we come to the reporting regulations, because that is what is being proposed in this particular bill, the reporting mechanism, Mr. Speaker, we will provide, Mr. Speaker, and make it possible for us as both National Assembly and the Senate to do actually a thorough audit of this debt, what were the conditions for that particular borrowing, and the purpose for which it was borrowed, Mr. Speaker, because that remains unclear. And we cannot expect that the people you represent, Mr. Speaker, in this House will be in a better position than you as a senator who serves in this House to tell them of this mechanism. Mr. Speaker, Clause 3 of the bill seeks also to amend Section 12 of the Act by deleting paragraph B and introducing provisions that provides for the proper management and efficient use of budgetary resources by national government entities. And also, Mr. Speaker, I like that it further proposes that on the definition of public debt, Mr. Speaker, you know, this conversation about national debt has created a thinking, especially in Kenya, because we have two levels of government, that people imagine that even when we borrow for purposes of funding certain projects in our counties, Mr. Speaker, is still considered as a debt for counties and a debt separate for national government, Mr. Speaker. Kenya is one unitary state, despite the fact that we have two levels of government, Mr. Speaker, and therefore it's my expectation and appreciation, rather, Mr. Speaker, that even as we make this amendment, Mr. Speaker, we will be in support of the proposal to conclude on this issue and ensure that we just call it the public debt, because it's a debt owed by the people of Kenya, and I like that provision. Clause 5, Mr. Speaker, as I move to conclude, of the bill, seeks to amend Section 31 by deleting the word national debt wherever the word appears and replacing it with public debt, for the same reason that I've just explained, Mr. Speaker, that it's one people, is the people of Kenya, and it actually makes it in sync with the constitutional provisions. If you read Article 211 all the way to Article 214, Mr. Speaker, it refers to as public debt, not national debt. And therefore, this was an act actually of poor legislative drafting. And students of legislative drafting need to follow through with this conversation. On many times, moving bills here, Mr. Speaker, I have pointed out on the need for us to try and seek to maintain the same language or wording that is used in the Constitution with the wording that is used in bills that we bring before Parliament. Otherwise, when you introduce new phrases, new clauses, you confuse members of the public, you open up yourself for legislation, for litigation, rather, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with that proposal. Second last, Mr. Speaker, is Clause 6, which seeks to amend Section 50 of the PFM Act that requires the CS for Finance to submit to Parliament in writing explanation where specific public debt has exceeded the threshold as is set out in law, and provide reparative measures to restore or to improve it. That appreciating of the fact that we know where we are as a country. There is no need for further debate on our debt sustainability situation. But at least now, Mr. Speaker, we are beginning to take our place as Parliament and have a standing where for every breach or every time, Mr. Speaker, where public debt has exceeded certain thresholds, a written explanation be offered to Parliament so that Parliament can take actually its rightful place, Mr. Speaker, and receive on these reports. I see many times we are criticized, and rightfully so, Mr. Speaker, that what is it that you are doing as legislators? When the debate of public debt came to Parliament, what did you say? What have you done? And all that conversation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that finally we have the reins of power and are able to do this with so much ease because it's now expressly provided for. First of all in the Constitution and subsequently now in this legislation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must commend our committee because I see in the way the bill it is drafted, it tried to make the reporting mechanism to be only the National Assembly. I don't know where some of these drafters come from or emanate from. I think they wake up, some of them from drunken stupors and just draft legislation without proper reading or reflecting on what the Constitution says. How can Constitution, Mr. Speaker, speak so clearly about Parliament that it shall provide legislation for reporting mechanism for public debt. Then some idiot sits somewhere, Mr. Speaker, and just drafts legislation and say, oh, National Assembly shall be receiving these reports. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is something that we have continued to point out to the state law office. And so long as they don't learn, they will continue learning the hard way. This is something that I've mentioned to them many occasions, that read your constitution. You may not like the Senate, but appreciate the powers that the constitution and the people of Kenya has given it, Mr. Speaker.
What's your point of order, Senator Eddie?
Mr. Speaker, you know, Senator Leader Aaron Cheriot is my leader. Yeah. And you know, I never want to interrupt him, especially when he's submitting on very serious issues that define our relationship with the National Assembly. You know, and I can empathize literally with his passion on submitting on this issue. But Mr. Speaker, is the wonderful senator in order to use the term idiot? Some idiot somewhere. You see, I think I do understand, you know, the immense, you know, issue around why we are not being involved in issues to do with the finances, because there is no any financial matter in this country that will ever not touch on counties. And in any case, this House has got some of the soberest minds that can be able to help the country think about these budget issues. And I really, really do support the passion with which, for the first time actually, I feel like this House, the leader is standing very hard for this House to be able to actually have a voice on financial matter. But even with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage that perhaps you can withdraw the idiot part, because it's non-parliamentary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw idiot and replace it with some very ignorant fellow, Mr. Speaker, because...
Mind also the requirement under Standing Order 92 on the language that you've used.
Okay. I am guided, Speaker. I appreciate.
Proceed.
Lastly, Mr. Speaker, is clause 7 that seeks to amend the PFM Act by introducing a new paragraph, section 63, to bring additional functions to the Office of a Public Debt Management Office, in including advising Parliament and Cabinet Secretary on the sustainable levels of public debt and annual borrowing limit. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is a superfluous provision. I don't mind it, but I don't see how extremely useful it is to us as Parliament. Why do I say so, Mr. Speaker? Because, Mr. Speaker, we have the Parliamentary Budget Office that does exactly this. They advise actually, and I find their advice to be more prudent than any other advice that you can get from any other part of this country, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, debt sustainability, whether we have breached certain provisions. I find the provisions of, or the advice rather, Mr. Speaker, of the Parliamentary Budget Office to be more accurate than, or more responsive actually to my needs as a legislator than any other advice that come from elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, on those provisions, while I do not mind it, I feel that our committee should continue to use actually the advice of PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, very professional analysts that serve in that particular department, some of the brightest minds on public finance that you'll find in this country, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, reading through the recommendation, Mr. Speaker, the last but not least, is this conversation about anchoring of the public debt as a percentage of the gross domestic product in present value terms will ensure actually the consistency that we have been looking for and provide or promote sustainability in public debt, Mr. Speaker. On 2 occasions, Mr. Speaker, when I've had the opportunity to vote, Mr. Speaker, on public debt, I voted against the decision, Mr. Speaker, to place it on a static figure, because I followed through this conversation, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that finally, those of us that held the view that having our debt measure as a percentage of our GDP in net present value, Mr. Speaker, is a better and more consistent measure than just putting a static figure of 5 billion, 10 billion, 9 trillion, Mr. Speaker, as has been the case. I am glad that finally we have been listened to, and that's a proposal that is coming. Because, Mr. Speaker, why do we argue so? Mr. Speaker, if you follow many countries that measure their debt using this particular model that we now want to adopt, Mr. Speaker, you will find that they appreciate that that the economy fluctuates. It's not something that is static. There are reasons, Mr. Speaker, that today you can be doing so well as an economy, like many global economic powerhouses were doing before 2020. But something like COVID comes up, Mr. Speaker. Do you have to rush back to Parliament and adjust and do all this kind of proposal? Mr. Speaker, I don't think there is a difference in how you should run public debt and how you run your own personal finances, Mr. Speaker. If you know very well that you're doing well economically, then you can walk to a financial institution, give the justification, and you will borrow, Mr. Speaker, against your own expectations and the justification that you can provide before a financial institution. Basically, that's what we are saying, other than just tying round a figure around your head and knowing that at any given time, I know that I can never borrow beyond 1 million or 2 million Kenya shillings, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I appreciate the wisdom of the committee in agreeing with that proposal, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I've explained that the committee have actually proposed an amendment in terms of the reporting mechanism, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate, because even if the committee did not propose that reporting mechanism, Article 211(2) has already done it for us, Mr. Speaker, because it speaks to the houses of parliament, not any house. And therefore, whatever games are being played on that particular part of the bill, even without our committee pointing out, our powers are safely secured, Mr. Speaker, and we shall continue to demand of these reports to be brought before this House. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to appreciate, and I hope that as a House we can conclude on this particular bill, so that we await now the regulations, Mr. Speaker, where we will answer many of the questions that if you read through the report and the presentations, it has been promised that in subsequent regulations, and I agree with the need to perhaps anchor some of these provisions by regulation rather than by legislation, Mr. Speaker, because while it's difficult to make many of these amendments, you can always argue this way or the other way with regulations and amend them with more ease without having to hold our economy at ransom, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, with those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time, and do ask Senator Ali Roba, Captain, the chairperson of our Committee on Budget and Finance, to second. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Ali Roba.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second. And as I second, I would like to, the majority leader has really explained the object behind why, what informed for this amendment to be pushed. Globally, the best practice out there is to anchor, the public debt ceiling as a percentage of the GDP, which is performance-based, meaning the number that is proposed in the amendment as shared is 55% of the GDP, where we have analyzed through consultation with the National Treasury as well as our own Parliamentary Budget Office. And I've been able to determine currently it stands at 64.1%. And the committee that I chair further engaged with the CS National Treasury, who I have a lot of faith in, Mr. Speaker. I say I have a lot of faith because we've had a little less than 1 year engagement with CS Ndungu of National Treasury. And whatever he has discussed with us as a committee, we have managed to see consistency in terms and determination to be able to really bring out what he said. As I have shared before, Mr. Speaker, I've served as a governor for 10 years. Mr. Speaker, 9 years having served as a governor, in 9 years, this is the first time that National Treasury was able to release all monies due to county governments by 30th of June as required by law. The same in 10 years. This is the first time that the National Treasury was able to release monies due to CDF by 30th of June as required by law. Mr. Speaker, sir, in 10 years I've served as a governor. This is the first time, the first tranche of the shareable revenue, due to counties was released in the month of July. Normally it comes in September or October. that means that the CS is determined to make sure the performance of our GDP as far as revenue performance and the discipline to comply with the requirement of law is anchored. When we engage, Mr. Speaker, the CS Treasury in the public participation engagement and taken him on in terms of how does he intend to make sure the 61.4% of that is translated, should we adapt public debt to GDP, ratio as proposed 55%, and where now translated it stands at 64.1%. How does he intend to bring it down to 55% as per the requirement of this amendment? And the CS Treasury shared that he intends in 2024 to bring it down from 64.1 to 61.8, and 2025 to 60.1, 2026 to bring it down to 58.2, and by 2027 to comply and bring it down to 55%, which is very serious commitment from CS Treasury and a healthy one, because should our GDP grow, then this percentage will mean growth in borrowing ceilings within the 55%, but a higher number, as opposed to what we used to have, where there is absolute debt ceiling number, regardless of performance of government. And Mr. Speaker, sir, if you look at the performance, if you look at the public debt ceiling over the past number of years, and you draw a graph, you are going to see consistently the number in absolute terms has continued going up, but not against any explainable formula that is able to make sense. And the bill suggests anchoring public debt as a percentage of GDP, which is going to instill prudence, which is also going to limit in terms of the free will by the CS Treasury to be able to just decide if we can take on board available debt just because it is available, because it will force the Treasury team to be able to go back and compute based on the current GDP performance, what is the window of borrowing they have, where that window now is busted, and over the next 5 years, the object and intent of this bill is to make sure that it is brought down to 55% within the law, down from 64.1%. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to support and second the motion. Second the bill as second reading as proposed by Majority Leader. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, I now propose the question that the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 16 of 2023, be now read a second time. Honorable Senator Samson Kiprotich, Cherarkei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for this opportunity. I rise to support this Public Finance Management Amendment Bill 2023, Mr. Speaker, sir. It has to go on record that for the different occasions when the ceiling of public debt was being raised on the floor of this House, I voted against. Because one, it was no longer sustainable. To put an absolute figure, Mr. Speaker, sir, as you are aware, the debt now will be anchored on a percentage as opposed to absolute figure then. As you are aware, as we talk today, the 10 trillion public debt that the country is facing, Mr. Speaker, is 64.1% of the gross domestic product, or GDP, as you are aware. Mr. Speaker, sir, this issue of public debt continues to be a serious issue, especially when the country is struggling both with domestic and foreign borrowing. And the President, Dr. William Ruto, on several occasions, has averred and stated that he is willing to ensure that we stop foreign borrowing, to ensure we have a sustainable, Mr. Speaker, public debt in this country. Mr. Speaker, this issue of putting anchoring percentage into GDP of public debt is very critical. At 55%, Mr. Speaker, and in any extreme cases, increasing it by 5% by the Cabinet Secretary in charge of National Treasury, and by only explaining the breach of that 5% increment upon 55% of GDP and explaining it to the Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you read under Article 201 on the public finance, on the Constitution, on the principles of public finance, Mr. Speaker, on the public finance, and that is Article 201B, Part C, it says the burdens and benefits of the use of resources and public borrowing shall be shared equitably between present and future generations, Mr. Speaker. So even if it means the borrowing, we must be considerate of the posterity. We must be considerate of what is happening as had been envisaged in one of the principles, Mr. Speaker, of sustainable public debt or public borrowing by the government, Mr. Speaker, because we must ensure that the future generations have an inheritance, not only in public debt, Mr. Speaker, but in terms of development. And I think most of this development that has been done, for example, by Kibaki administration, Thika Super Highway, the people who borrowed them might not appreciate then when they were borrowing to ensure that that bypass, Mr. Speaker, or that road being expanded, Thika Super Highway, they might not have appreciated. But now, many years down the line, when Nairobi has expanded, and we have a huge population in Nairobi and use of that road, Mr. Speaker, now we are now valuing, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, the anchoring of debt in percentage is very critical because this is the best international best practice. So this amendment, Mr. Speaker, is a straightforward amendment. What we are amending under Public Finance Management Act of 2023 is very straight because we are just doing what we call best practices in terms of ensuring that we get our debt anchored in percentage, Mr. Speaker. And this will allow government to operate. You remember, Mr. Speaker, in unprecedented times during COVID, and you wanted to raise public debt, Mr. Speaker, you could imagine the challenges that came with it in terms of raising quorum, in terms of getting senators to vote. There was the issue of non-physical contact, Mr. Speaker, social distancing. And I think in unforeseeable challenges like COVID, I'm using that as an example, Mr. Speaker, it will be very important. I have seen on many occasions, and now that the public debt of this country is 10 trillion, Mr. Speaker, it must be what we call discipline in terms of management of public resources. Even as we anchor, Mr. Speaker, into public debt, the commitment of government and President William Ruto has been to ensure at all points, Mr. Speaker, sir, fight against corruption becomes at the center. Because we don't have to borrow, Mr. Speaker, huge chunks of money, put the country in a public debt where we were nearing economic crisis and allow corrupt individuals within and without government, Mr. Speaker, to blunder or mismanagement, Mr. Speaker, on wastage of public funds, yet that money has been borrowed, Mr. Speaker. Even on the individual level, Mr. Speaker, you have never seen individuals where they borrow money to go and kupiga sherehe, Mr. Speaker, or take chai and mandazi. Everybody who borrows a loan from the bank would want to account for each and every single coin. Mr. Speaker, if we are translating the same commitment, the way we translate to taking our personal loans and mortgages, Mr. Speaker, this country would have gone. So I agree with the President that the commitment against the fight of corruption be a top priority, not only national government and county governments. We have heard about the pending bills in Vihiga County, for example, where Senator Outsourcing has brought to the attention of the House. Mr. Speaker, we want to loud government, and you have had a former governor confess on the floor of the House that during their tenure since the inception of devolution, under Article 219 of the Constitution 2010, Mr. Speaker, sir, money has not been dispensed, has not been given out, Mr. Speaker, at an opportune or on time. Mr. Speaker, for example, Nandi, in the month of June and July, have received over 1.2 billion in terms of cash disbursement. Even the CDF to members of National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, there is no reason as to why our businessmen and women across the country, counties, and national government, Mr. Speaker, should continue to suffer, yet there is a sufficient money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, us as the protectors of devolution, yesterday, the Intergovernmental Technical Relations Committee appeared before the Devolution Committee of the Senate. And they made assertion that national government is yet to release 272 billion to follow functions that have been devolved. What does that translate? The national government devolved function without following with costing. 272 billion, that is a huge and chunk of money, Mr. Speaker, that is even more than enough that we are giving counties of 385.3 billion in this financial year of 2023-2024. So we need as a Senate, Mr. Speaker, to play also our role. If 272 billion is lying in Nairobi instead of being allocated to 47 counties, Mr. Speaker, then we must work hard towards achieving that end, Mr. Speaker. I am happy that in terms of borrowing, Mr. Speaker, there was a circular, I don't know whether it's circular or the law of the PMF Act, that any borrowing by the counties, Mr. Speaker, must be guaranteed by national government. Mr. Speaker, for example, at the tail end of the last Senate session, before it lapsed when Sina died, the Laikipia County government made an application for approval of borrowing by the Senate. At that time, it was almost a few months to elections. And as a Senate, out of our wisdom, we declined because we were not sure what the money was intended for. Yet elections were approaching, and we are aware that the governor in office was trying to defend their seat. So, Mr. Speaker, I think on the aspect of public debt and public borrowing, I support that it should be anchored in percentage. It is the best practices internationally. It is also convenient. It is efficient for government. And I think many people will ask, what will be the role of Parliament when you have anchored at 55% and an extra 5% in case of breach? The aspect of the upshot of this law is they will give an update in case the Cabinet Secretary breaches at that percentage, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it is our interest to bring from 64.1% of our GDP to 55% to 60% of the GDP in terms of borrowing in the present value terms, Mr. Speaker. But Speaker, another point is that I don't know, is this a disease? Is it a cancer? Is it a terminal illness that is in state law office? Article 93 has been said by ML, defines Parliament, and I know they are watching, and they can refer, defines Parliament as National Assembly and the Senate. Mr. Speaker, you was Druli, and Senator Fage was my member. We drafted pleadings and went to High Court on interpretation of under Article 110, Mr. Speaker, on the non-concurrence of over 24 legislations. Why, with these drafters, why would they want to conveniently move Senate from participating? This public debt is not only concern of members of National Assembly or the national government. It is the concern of counties. Because when you take a public debt, Mr. Speaker, when you borrow loan on behalf of Kenya, you are not borrowing it on behalf of national government. You are also borrowing on behalf of all of us, and these people are in counties. Mr. Speaker, in the height of hearing of the role of Senate in division of revenue in 2013, the CJ Emeritus, Willie Mutunga, asked, if you are borrowing and you are spending money, where are you spending at? I thought you were spending in counties. That is a similar question I want to ask the members of national and the drafters of state law office, Mr. Speaker. We must be candid that I don't know what the intention of supremacy battles between the National Assembly and the Senate, and I think the National Assembly should just accept their role as the junior brothers, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the amendments, the Cabinet Secretary shall submit to the National Assembly. This is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. I want to believe it was the mistake of the drafters. I don't believe it was the mistake of anybody else. Because why would you submit to National Assembly? Where is the role of the Senate? And Article 93 is very clear, Mr. Speaker. And we don't want to go to court. These are small things that we can be rectified, Mr. Speaker. Even the committee in the National Assembly responsible. We want the Committee of Finance and Budget, Mr. Speaker, to be responsible on the public debt and consider the report and submit the report before the floor of the Senate, Mr. Speaker. We should not, as the fourth Senate, we should not allow ourselves to legislate ourselves outside the work or legislative business, Mr. Speaker. We should not. Why are we legislating ourselves out of the role that we have been given under Article 96? Because the work of the Parliament is lawmaking process, Mr. Speaker. It is oversight. It is representation. When I'm here on the behalf of the great people of Nandi who are close to 1 million residents. Despite that I have 6 members of National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that you want, when you are borrowing, you want the Senate to be involved? But when you are assessing the report, when you are doing budget making of borrowing the money from international organizations, I want to encourage my colleagues from both sides of the House. Kindly, let us not legislate ourselves outside our work. We are slowly taking ourselves out of work, Mr. Speaker. Another point that I wanted to make in quick succession, the National Assembly shall discuss the report and report. We must have our own Finance and Budget Committee to consider and table in Senate. We must know what is the public debt. The public debt, unless somebody will tell me, the people who are paying public debt through taxation are people who do not live in 47 county governments. Then I will not have a problem. Unless you have different Kenyans who do not live in counties. If they don't live in counties, Mr. Speaker, then we can agree with this proposal. But I agree with the Finance and Budget. We must amend this proposal. It is possible. Let us go to the committee of mediation committee, Mr. Speaker. We have done. The Constitution is there. Why are we afraid of amending? We must amend this amendment. We are going to amend the amendment to ensure we anchor. Apart from anchoring at the percentage, Mr. Speaker, we ensure we anchor the role of the Senate in the management of public debt, because the principles of financial under Article 201, Mr. Speaker, has been very clear that the Parliament is considered of two, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the interesting things, when it comes to public debt and resultant financial obligations incurred by the national is a charge on the National Consolidated Fund, unless the Cabinet Secretary determines regulations approved by Parliament. Why are you cherry-picking the role of Senate? You just cherry-pick. You say when it is about the approval and the report and explaining the breach. Why is the Cabinet Secretary of National Treasury comfortable to send the explanation of 5% increment above 55% anchored on GDP on present value terms, as opposed to sending to the Senate? Mr. Speaker, this is mischief. We must stop mischief. We should not legislate mischief. We should not violate the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, I agree Article 213 of the Constitution, borrowing 212, and the public debt, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Article 214 is very clear. The public debt is a charge on the consolidated fund by an act of Parliament may provide for charging all part of the public debt to other public funds. So even the Constitution recognizes the role of Parliament. That even if you have to charge on consolidated, the act of Parliament, which is the PMF Act, is very clear, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, all financial obligations and public debt has been defined. When you look at the borrowing by national government, Mr. Speaker, there is about reporting mechanisms, Article 211, like with within 7 days, either House or Parliament, so request by for financial present to the relevant information. Mr. Speaker, so this section, you being one of the learned seniors, Mr. Speaker, and of course I know your prowess and competence, having you represented me in different courts of not in this country. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to say this, Mr. Speaker. When you look at Article 211, Mr. Speaker, and you understand this very well, this proposal by PMF Act and the legislative drafters, Mr. Speaker.
What is your point of order, Senator Faki?
I don't wish to interrupt my junior, Senator Chiragei, but he said that he had been represented in courts of note in this country. Is the resident magistrate court in Kapsabet a court of note or a court of record?
Where they tried to kick it. I do believe Senator Cherargei meant courts of law.
Yes.
But because of where he comes from,
yes,
and the dialect, he was unable to pronounce it very well to the satisfaction of the Honorable Senator from Mombasa. Proceed, Senator Cherargei.
Mr. Speaker, you know the dominant language of Senator Faki is Kiswahili, Some of us are speaking Queen's English, but I just met courts of law, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I don't doubt he is conversant in both languages, but the prowess of my English, grasp of English language and Queen's language can only be equated to the late Kijana Wamalwa, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, so that this is a straightforward amendment, when you look under Article 211, Mr. Speaker, we still have a role. So even if these drafters who are mischievous, I don't want to use the bad language or unparliamentary language, decided it's national, it will be negated. And you know, Mr. Speaker, Senator Okoitio Mutata, with all due respect, or other Kenyan might move to court and have this part nullified. Because Article 211 is very clear that the reporting of public debt is done by houses of parliament. So why would somebody in state law office, we need to determine competence of people who are drafters in state law office, or they need to come for capacity building before the Senate, or some of us who can do a pro bono, Mr. Speaker. Because why would we legislate a law that somebody will go to court, Senator outsourcing, and nullified? I think we need to amend and ensure, Mr. Speaker, with those many remarks, I support this amendment to anchor the public debt on percentage of GDP to present value terms, Mr. Speaker. We are struggling with a public debt of 10 trillion. I hope when this is anchored, Mr. Speaker, we are able to bring the public debt GDP of 64.1% to 55%, Mr. Speaker, and ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the country moves forward. We need to give it to the president so that we can ensure he implements the plan of transformation and economic prosperity going into the future, where all Kenyans will enjoy under Kenya Kwanza administration. With those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support the amendment with the amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Osotsi Godfrey Atieno.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this bill, which is Public Finance Management Amendment Bill 2023. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I want to say that I will support the bill, but with the reservation. Having listened to a number of contributions from colleagues, clearly this bill will require some amendments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are provisions in this bill which clearly violate the Constitution. For example, Mr. Speaker, when you make reference to the National Assembly under the Amendment 2D that says that the Cabinet Secretary shall submit to the National Assembly by 30th April in every year a report on debt status and the borrowing undertaken by the national government. Mr. Speaker, this ignores the role of the Senate because, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the Constitution, under Article 225, Financial Control, Article 2251 talks about an act of Parliament shall provide for the establishment, functions, and responsibility of the National Treasury. 2 of that article talks about Parliament shall enact legislation to ensure both expenditure, control, and transparency in all governments and establish mechanism to ensure their full implementation. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, this implies that Senate has a role in financial control, in determining expenditure control and transparency in all governments. All government means includes even county governments. These particular amendments offends Article 225 of the Constitution that requires involvement of Parliament, in this case, the National Assembly and the Senate. So, honorable senators, colleagues, I want to implore you that we should not pass this bill unless the amendments that recognizes the role of Senate are included in this bill. Mr. Speaker, I have also noticed that the amendments that requires the Cabinet Secretary to determine by regulation that all or part of the public debt or resulting financial obligation is a charge on another public fund. It is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, if you refer to Article 214 of the Constitution on public debt, it's very clear, Mr. Speaker. It says the public debt is a charge on the consolidated fund, but an act of parliament may provide for the charge for charging all or part of the public debt to other public body. Act of parliament. But what is happening here is that the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury wants to give himself powers that he does not have by circumventing an act of parliament and bringing in regulation. The Constitution does not refer to regulation. The Constitution makes reference to an act of parliament. So the reading of that amendment, Mr. Speaker, offends the Constitution and makes this bill unconstitutional. I want to agree with my colleagues who have said that the amendment to amend the debt threshold to 55% of the gross domestic product in present value terms, I want to support that. But that can only work, Mr. Speaker, if you have an economy that is thriving. If you have an economy where cost of living is managed. If you have an economy that there is no inflation. If you have an economy that is stable. With the period given of 5 years, to me it appears a short period of time. I think with the current economic situation in the country, Mr. Speaker, I think that we are going to have a challenge attaining the 55% threshold. Mr. Speaker, this bill also wants to amend so that the PFM Act makes reference to public debt and not national debt. I even wonder where they got the national debt, because national debt is a strange term to the Constitution and forgets about the county government. So I want to agree with the amendment that the PFM Act needs to amended so that where there is any reference to national debt, we amend and make reference to public debt. Mr. Speaker, I have also seen an amendment that also proposes that the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury will be by 30th of April every year be submitting a report on the status of debt, public debt, to Parliament. I think, as I've said before, that should be Parliament. But again, Mr. Speaker, that provision, if amended, it is a good provision, so that Parliament can keep on monitoring the debt status. Because right now, we don't get a report, and even the other day, when we heard that the Office of the Auditor General complaining that they are not aware about the debt, public debt statement. They cannot verify the public debt statement. I think that was a very unfortunate thing, and I think the committee responsible, which in this case is a Public Accounts Committee, needs to invite the Auditor General to shed more light on that revelation. Because Parliament, we have a responsibility to know how much we are borrowing. We have a responsibility to know what is our debt status. And I think this provision, save for the fact that is only making reference to the National Assembly and not Parliament, is a very progressive amendment. That Parliament every year In fact, I will even propose that we do it every 6 months, should know the position in as far as public debt is concerned. Mr. Speaker, with the amendments that I have suggested, and I hope the Committee for Finance and Budget will sponsor this amendment, so that as a Senate, we should not legislate ourselves out of work. If we allow this bill to pass as it is, this will be an unfortunate moment for this Senate, because we will be legislating ourselves out of work and complaining later. We expect the Committee for Finance and Budget to make appropriate amendments to ensure that this bill is constitutional, because as it is now, this bill is unconstitutional, and every Kenyan has a right to move to court to challenge the provisions contained in this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for those few remarks, I support, but with the reservation in those particular comments I've made in relation to constitutionality of this bill and in relation to the position of Senate on this matter is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Osotsi. Senator Boni Halwale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to support the amendment of the National Assembly Bill number 16 of 2022 for the amendment of the Public Finance Management Act, which is now before the floor. Mr. Speaker, these are very exciting times to live, because for the first time in the long history I have been in public service in this country, both as a doctor and as a parliamentarian, where I have been privileged by God to serve as a member of the National Assembly and of this Senate, Mr. Speaker. For the first time, a government is in office that, Mr. Speaker, that is ready and willing to release funds from the center to the periphery. As we speak now, the government has released money to the Higher Education Loans Board. Our children are now applying on a clear-cut criteria so that the poor will be at the front, first to be served before the children of the children of the rich can have a bite at Jesheri. Number two, the Popular Constituency Development Fund has been released to all members of parliament, including the women reps. And finally, but not least, Mr. Speaker, all the monies owed, thanks to the mismanagement of the economy by the handshake government, owed, Mr. Speaker, to the county governments has now been released. I think the people of Kakamega will be very excited this afternoon to hear that on the 15th of July, 1,097,574,932 shillings in this financial year was given to their governor, Governor Barasa. So, Governor Barasa is swimming in billions of shillings, and I hope that, like all other governors, he is going to give.
What is your point of order, Senator Osotsi?
Sorry, my elder Senator Boni. Mr. Speaker, on Thursday evening, I was challenged under Standing Order number 105, Statement of Fact, by my good friend Senator Wakoli on the issue of disbursement of funds to counties, where I had stated that the Committee of Public Investments and Special Funds did a commendable job in contributing to the issue of disbursement of funds by 30th of June. And
How does that concern my contribution?
no, it does, because you are making reference to the same. So, Mr.
Senator
Speaker,
Boni, he's on a
you
point of
directed.
order. Let's listen to him.
You directed that I substantiate this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I have come with a set of documents ready
Senator Sotsi,
to substantiate.
take your seat. Take your seat kindly. Remember, you had mentioned that position earlier on to the chair. I made an inquiry and I indeed confirmed that that did not amount to you required to substantiate today, because the factual issue was on the floor of the House then cleared. You are not required, therefore, to substantiate this afternoon, and I made that inquiry with the clerk and confirmed that position. So it is not a point of order. I would like to ask you to take your seat. Proceed, Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with due respect, I would like the Honorable Sotsi to take it easy, learn the rules. You can only rise on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, sir, in my time when I'm out of order. But if you have a procedural issue, you can sort out with the Office of
Senator
the Clerk,
Boni
the Office of the Speaker.
Proceed to
Thank you, Mr.
your
Speaker.
contribution to the bill.
I was complaining, Mr. Speaker, so that I catch your sympathy, so that you give me the lost time that I've lost through his intervention.
You can be sure you will be granted your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was announcing the good news to the people of Kakamega that our governor, thanks to this Senate, thanks to my persuasiveness in the Committee of Finance and my own drive, he is now swimming in billions of shillings, and I want to urge him and all the governors of Kenya to give priority to two things. The first one is that all pending bills owed to business people, some of them who have died because of debts, because of pressure from their creditors, those pending bills should now be settled. We want the fruits of devolution to be enjoyed by creditors. And two, Mr. Speaker, that priority be given by all governors in ensuring, Mr. Speaker, that ongoing projects are completed before new projects are started. Specifically, in Bomet, for example, the Bomet Stadium, when I pass there, whenever I fly over that stadium on my way to Kakamega, I feel very offended that 11 years into devolution, that stadium is not complete. The same to Bohongo Stadium in Kakamega, the same to Shamahubu Hospital in Mumiasi, Level 4 Hospital in Kakamega, the same to Malinya Market, the same to Hayega Market, Mr. Speaker, the same to Butere Hospital in Kakamega. These things must be given priority before my governor then embarks on new projects. Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with the proposed amendments in Section 2, Section 12, Section 15, and Section 32. But, Mr. Speaker, I think when it comes to the amendments proposed in Section 50, the public deserves to hear us. I therefore want to use this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to examine the proposed amendment in Section 50. Mr. Speaker, this is a paradigm shift. For the first time, we want to align with public management of debt. We want to align the management of public debt with the best international practices as you find in the United States of America, in Australia, and in Canada. Namely, we shift from the outdated debt ceiling, Mr. Speaker, to the principle of anchoring, or the principle of debt anchor. Mr. Speaker, this amendment proposes that the public debt must never exceed 55% of the GDP. Let me acknowledge that today we are in a bad place because of the greed of the handshake government. The president went on and then president went on and borrowed, right, left, and center, and left this country. We are currently at 66% of our GDP. We are in debt. So we are in a hole. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that Professor Njuguna, who is a professor of economics from the University of Nairobi, and Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of this House, and I can see the Senator of Mombasa is having a closed eye reflection on my contribution. And he's nodding his head. That is very good, Mr. Speaker. Professor Njuguna comes from our generation of the University of Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, the distinguished generation, thank you, Mr. Speaker, that has served this country wherever they have gone, including we are the generation that has given this country the first open heart surgery, the generation, Mr. Speaker, that gave this country a kidney transplant in Kenya and in the region, competing only South Africa on the continent. He has explained to us as a committee, and our minds are very clear. And he's telling us that if you have an appetite for loans, go and borrow. But if you must borrow, start by growing the GDP. If you grow the GDP enough, go and borrow. It will allow you to borrow but not exceed 55%. And this, Mr. Speaker, should not look like something very strange or difficult to understand to Kenyans. Kenyans, as they say in English, if you want to run a family well, you should run it the way you cook a fish. So what is the fish in this context? Mr. Speaker, it is this. Today, if you go to Cooperative Bank, Kenya Commercial Bank, ABSA, Equity, and try to borrow, they tell you, for God's sake, come for the money. But before they credit you with the money that you want to borrow, they look at your performance. They look at how good your account is. If it is good, you borrow. If it is poor, you don't borrow. So we are now saying our big reserve, the gross domestic product, will in future be determining whether we can go and borrow or not borrow, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this therefore lays emphasis on scientific management of public debt. It shifts the focus on growing the GDP. I remember, Mr. Speaker, I think those days you must have been in class 8 or below. The then Minister for Finance, Finance Minister John Michuki, approached us in 2009. He wanted us to raise the debt ceiling. And Mr. Speaker, why are you smiling? I suspect I have misquoted your age. Forgive me. Mr. Speaker, and because of the hawk eye of former Member of Parliament for Imenti Central, Kitobu Imanyara. Kitobu Imanyara was able to spot the mischief. It is what gave birth, Senator Mungatana, you'll remember, to the famous computer errors. Yes, you remember the famous computer errors. So there can be mischief when it is not scientific. But now that we are making it scientific, it will be forever easy for us as parliamentarians to see that somebody is exceeding, Mr. Speaker, the 55% anchor. I therefore want to thank members of the minority side. I've listened to your contribution, including the one of Senator Soti. There is very good grasp of this. And especially the distinguished senator from Mombasa, who in my committee, he was the first to spot what was concerning us. And what was that, Mr. Speaker? We were concerned that the provision that then allows the cabinet secretary in charge of finance to then exceed the 55% on exceptional circumstances could visit this country a disaster. And I salute you, Senator Faki. So, we put Professor under a lot of pressure to convince us why we would give a moratorium of 5 years where the minister is enjoying that particular window. And he convinced us. And therefore, if there is still any member in this House who does not sit in the Finance Committee, I want to persuade you, we have represented you well, we have understood that there indeed can be exceptional circumstances where you need to go beyond the borrowing ceiling. So what did we do as a committee? We then insisted that it be clear what exceptional circumstances can be. And Mr. Speaker, we found that one such exceptional circumstances is the depreciation of the Kenya shilling. The Kenya shilling can depreciate so fast that it can hurt our public debt, and then we end up, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a lot of loud consultations.
Senator Eddie and Senator Roba, may you consult in very low tones to allow the senator to be heard in silence.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is exactly what we are going through now. Most of you have your own Kenya shilling account, and others have got the Forex account. You have seen if in the last few weeks you left your money to be in your shilling account and not in the dollar account, by the time you swing back, you've lost a lot of money. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, this becomes a special and exceptional circumstances. Another exceptional circumstance, Mr. Speaker, is in the event of an epidemic. When I was a young man at medical school at the University of Nairobi, we used to be taught by Professor Pampa about pandemics, epidemics, and it used to look something purely academic until just 3 years ago, when we all lived through the corona COVID-19 problem. So these things do happen. You can see I was in medical school over 20 years ago. I had never seen this kind of thing. When I was being taught at medical school, I thought it's just theory, but it came to pass. So this law anticipates that eventuality. Mr. Speaker, we have negative climatic change. You know that we are just coming out of the longest drought period. So that it has happened now, it can happen again and force our Minister of Finance, the Cabinet Secretary in Finance, to treat it as an exceptional circumstances to force him to borrow. Mr. Speaker, the internal conflict leading to civil strife can be a cause of this kind of problem, with the bad manners of some honorable members, not in this House, but at other levels, putting sufurias on their heads. It can morph into an internal strife. So we want to anticipate this, and as we do, we want to urge our sufuria-wielding leaders in this country to realize that the answer lies in growing our GDP. Mr. Speaker, we also know that external shocks can actually become a serious exceptional circumstance. And you and I are lucky we are now living in times when we have witnessed an actual external shock, namely the war and conflict in Ukraine. It is external, far removed, over 8,000 kilometers away from here. But, Mr. Speaker, it has affected us. And then, last but not least, Mr. Speaker, we have the issue of natural disasters. It might look laughable, but who would have known that locusts, which were last a threat in this country after the Second World War, would again be a threat in our lifetime. So such disasters, including floods, etc., are a real thing. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by registering my disappointment, Mr. Speaker, with the Attorney General of Kenya, who is my friend. In fact, after this, I'm going to place him a call. When this proposed amendment was, Mr. Speaker, brought before the House, it went to the Cabinet. And
Your time is up, Senator Boni. Just for your information, the public stadium that you made reference to in Bomet has been condemned and fit for completion by the Minister of Sports after having swallowed millions of shillings and having been there for the last 7 years. Senator Mwinyi Haji Mohamed Faki. Giving the mic, clerk, give Senator.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuchangia mswada wa marekebisho wa sheria ya fedha ya mwaka 2023. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwanza ningependa kusema kwamba naunga mkono marekebisho haya, lakini ningependa kwamba kufanywe mabadiliko katika marekebisho ambayo yamependekezwa katika mswada huu. Kwanza kabisa kwa kuondoka ni kwa leo vyombo vya habari vimeripoti kwamba dola ya Marekani inabadilishwa kwa shilingi 150 ya pesa za Kenya, ambayo kwa kusema ukweli ni jambo la kusikitisha, kwa sababu ina maana kwamba sarafu yetu inapungua thamani ikilinganishwa na dola ya Kimarekani ambayo ndio sarafu inatumika kimataifa. Mheshimiwa Spika, baadhi ya mambo ambayo yamesababisha kupungua kwa nguvu ya sarafu yetu ni baadhi ya policy ama nyendo za serikali hii ambayo tuko nayo. Kwa sababu serikali ilipoingia mamlakani, dola ilikuwa inabadilishwa kwa shilingi 110, 120, lakini tumeona kwamba imeongezeka kwa asilimia karibu 30 na kitu katika muda mchache wa zaidi ya mwaka mmoja, kabla ya mwaka mmoja kuisha. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ina maana kwamba hii serikali lazima irudi tena katika irudi chini, iangalie ni vitu gani ambavyo wanafanya ambavyo hawastahili kufanya. Wamesema kwamba kumekuwa na vita Ukraine, kumekuwa na hivi, kumekuwa na vile, lakini vita Ukraine vimekuwa kwa sasa kwa zaidi ya mwaka. Mheshimiwa Spika, vita vya Ukraine vilianza Februari mwaka uliopita. Kwa hivyo kwa sasa haviwezi kuwa ni nyenzo ambayo inachangia kupungua kwa thamani ya sarafu ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, kipengele cha 211 ya katiba yetu inaipa bunge hili fursa ya kutunga sheria zinazoangalia masuala ya kukopa na pia kuweka wazi sheria ambayo itamruhusu waziri wa fedha kuweza kutoa ripoti kwa bunge, na nikizungumzia bunge ninazungumzia bunge la Seneti, Mheshimiwa Spika, na bunge la kitaifa. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, huu mswada unapotaka kupunguza hii fursa ya kuleta ripoti na wapeleke ripoti kwa bunge la kitaifa peke yake, ina maana inakiuka katiba katika kipengele cha 211. Tukiangalia baadhi ya marekebisho kama vile 2B, 2C, Mheshimiwa Spika, 2D na 2E, zote zinasema kwamba waziri wa fedha ataweza kupeleka ripoti katika bunge la kitaifa kabla ya tarehe 30 mwezi wa 4 kwa kila mwaka. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ina maana hapa kwamba ile nafasi ya kuripoti itakuwa haiji tena katika bunge la Senate, itakuwa inapelekwa katika bunge la kitaifa peke yake, na hiyo itakuwa inakeuka katiba katika kipengele cha 211. Mheshimiwa Spika, pia kipengele cha 211B ya pili inasema kwamba katika muda wa siku 7 baada ya kauli kutoka kwa bunge lolote, yani bunge la kitaifa ama bunge la Senate, waziri anaweza kuitwa akaeleza ripoti ya mikopo ambayo imechukuliwa na vile pesa ambazo zimetumika katika mikopo hiyo. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa vipengele hivyo viwili, ina maana kwamba kipengele cha 2D na 2E zote ziko kinyume na katiba na hivyo hazifai, Mheshimiwa Spika, kukubalika na bunge hili. Mheshimiwa Spika, jambo la tatu ni kwamba kwa sasa deni letu limewekwa kama kiwango cha trilioni 10, na kwa sasa nafikiri wako hapo kama trilioni 9.8 ama 9.9, na sheria hii Mheshimiwa Spika inajaribu kubadili mfumo wa deni, yani deni liwe ni asilimia fulani ya mazao yanayotokana na nchi yetu ya Kenya. Kwa mfano, kwa sasa mazao yako trilioni 15, ambao tukiweka katika asilimia ya 55 itakuja kama trilioni 8 ama kiasi kama hicho. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, iwapo sheria hii itapita, ina maana kwamba deni letu litakuwa limekwenda mbele ama zaidi ya asilimia 55 ambayo imependekezwa katika mswada huu. Mheshimiwa Spika, waziri ameomba muda na sheria inataka kubadilishwa ili apewe muda wa miaka 5. Kwa maoni yangu Mheshimiwa Spika, miaka 5 ni mingi, kwa sababu kila mwaka bunge hili na bunge la kitaifa linazungumzia ile tunaita budget policy statement, ambapo pale serikali inatoa mapendekezo ya kueleza ni vipi wataweza kupunguza madeni kwa muda mfupi na vipi wataweza kupunguza madeni kwa muda mrefu. Hiyo ina maana kwamba mwaka ujao mwezi wa 3 au mwezi wa 4 tukati tunaangalia budget policy statement, tutakuwa na uwezo wa kuangalia, je, yale mapendekezo ambayo yametolewa yataweza kupunguza deni lile kutoka asilimia 64 ambayo iko sasa mpaka asilimia 55 ambayo inapendekezwa katika sheria hii. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, hatuna shida na kubadilisha mfumo wa deni kutoka asilimia fulani, kutoka kiwango cha trilioni 10 mpaka asilimia fulani ama asilimia 55 ya mazao yanayotokana na nchi ambao ni national GDP. Mheshimiwa Spika, tumeona kwamba tayari serikali kuu iko karibu kupenduka kiwango ambacho kimewekwa cha trilioni 10. Kwa hivyo mabadiliko haya Mheshimiwa Spika hayataipa serikali afueni yoyote, kwa sababu tayari wamevuka ule mpaka ambao wanatarajia kuweka kwa kuibadilisha kutoka kiwango cha trilioni 10 na kuweka katika asilimia 55 ya GDP. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ipo haja ya serikali kupewa muda, lakini ni muda gani? Nafikiri bunge hili litaangalia, kwa sababu mimi mapendekezo yangu ni muda wa miaka 3. Mheshimiwa Spika, kipengele ambacho kinaleta shida ni kipengele cha 2B ambacho kinasema 2B na C ambacho kinasema kwamba waziri anaweza kukiuka kiwango hicho cha asilimia 55 na baadaye kuleta ripoti bungeni ili kuweza kukubaliwa kufanya hivyo. Mheshimiwa Spika, tunasema hatuwezi kama bunge kukataa wajibu wetu wa kuiweka serikali katika sheria. Mheshimiwa Spika, kipengele hichi kikipita, ina maana kwamba serikali itakuwa na ile tunaita kwa Kiingereza free hand, free check, open check, a blank check ya kuongeza kiwango cha deni kulingana na vile anavyotaka, na kitu anatakana kufanya ni kwamba baada ya kuongeza waje bungeni wasema tumeongeza hii kwa sababu kulikuwa na jua kali, tumeongeza hii kwa sababu kulipita nzige sehemu fulani kwenda mahali fulani, tumeongeza hii kwa sababu kulikuwa hakuna hichi ama kile katika nchi ya kitaifa, Mheshimiwa Spika. Kwa hiyo tunasema hii 2C tunaikataa kwa sababu italinyima bunge hili na bunge la kitaifa nafasi ya kuhoji pesa zile zatakana kutumika kwa nini. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni bora aje katika bunge aseme nataka kuongeza deni kwa sababu ya 1, 2, 3 na alafu bunge likubali ama likatae, kuliko atumie pesa alafu baada ya kutumia pesa ndio aje bunge aseme niliongeza deni kwa sababu nimenunua makazi mapya kwa labda kwa rais ama kwa naibu wa rais, ama tumeongeza CAS ndio sababu tumeongeza deni kama hivyo. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunasema kwamba kipengee C hakifai kupitishwa kwa sababu kitakiuka katiba, kwa sababu bunge linapewa fursa na katiba kuhakikisha kwamba tumeweza kuiangalia serikali katika nyendo zake zote. Mheshimiwa Spika, vile vile pia ni wakati mwafaka kuwa na mjadala kuhusiana na swala la hii ofisi ya deni, Public Debt Office. Kwa sasa Mheshimiwa Spika, hii ofisi ya deni ni kitengo katika ofisi ya Wizara ya Fedha katika serikali. Mheshimiwa Spika, masuala ya deni ni masuala mengine ambayo yanaangalia hatima ya nchi nzima. Kwa sababu leo deni likitushinda, Mheshimiwa Spika, nchi inaweza kusambaratika. Kwa hivyo hatungependa masuala ya deni kama haya, Mheshimiwa Spika, yeye yanasimamiwa na watu ambao wameajiriwa na serikali, wanasimamiwa na waziri wa fedha. Tunataka ofisi ya deni iwe ni ofisi kando ya kikatiba, ili yale maamuzi wanayofanya yawe ni maamuzi yanafanyika kulingana na sheria. Mheshimiwa Spika, tukiangalia kama Central Bank ni taasisi ambayo ni huru na wanafanya maamuzi yao kulingana na sheria, na hakuna mtu ambaye anaweza kukataa maamuzi yao. Lakini kwa sasa Mheshimiwa Spika, masuala ya deni ni masuala ambayo yako chini ya Wizara ya Fedha na maamuzi yote.
Did you mean that ofisi ya deni iwe kando ya kikatiba?
Nimesema kwamba iwe ni ofisi ya kikatiba huru, independent office.
No, that is not what you said, but it's good that you have corrected. Thank you. Proceed.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, hii ofisi ya deni ni ofisi muhimu sana, kwamba haiwezekani iwe ni kitengo ni department katika ofisi ya waziri wa fedha katika nchi yetu. Mheshimiwa Spika, swala lingine ambalo ningependa kuligusia ni kwamba masuala ya deni ni kwamba kuna deni la serikali kuu na sasa kuna serikali za kaunti ambazo zimetambulika katiba. Tuna serikali za kaunti ambazo ziko tayari pia kukopa kulingana na fedha zao ambazo wanapata, mapato ambao wanapata yanawezesha labda kukopa ili waweze kufanya mipango yao kwa haraka na waweze kuendeleza maendeleo katika kaunti zao na walipe polepole kulingana na uwezo ambao wako nao katika kaunti zao, Mheshimiwa Spika. Lakini masuala ya deni, Mheshimiwa Spika, ni masuala ya tunaozungumzia ni deni ya serikali kuu peke yake. Tukiangalia kile kinachokopwa kinakopwa na serikali kuu. Serikali za kaunti zikienda kukopa wanaambiwa kwamba hamuna uwezo, subiri, nenda rudi. Mara nyingi Wizara ya Fedha, Mheshimiwa Spika, haiko tayari kutoa garantii ama kutoa dhibati kwamba zile serikali za kaunti ziweze kukopa. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ipo haja ya hili deni liweze kugawanya, tujue kwamba serikali za kaunti zinaweza kukopa kiwango gani na serikali kuu inaweza kukopa kiwango gani. Kama serikali kuu inaweza kukopa 70% ya hiyo 55 na serikali za kaunti ziweze kukopa 30 ya hiyo 55 ama 60 kwa 40, ingekuwa ni bora kabisa, kwa sababu kwa sasa hatujui ni vipi serikali za kaunti zinaweza kukopa. Iwapo wale wanaokopa ni lazima wende kwa serikali kuu waweze kuamua nani atakayekopa. Mheshimiwa Spika, ikiwa mimi ndio nafanya maamuzi ya kukopa, kwa mfano Senator Roba amekuja kwangu na yeye pia ataka kukopa, kwanza nitajiangalia mimi mwenyewe ambaye nataka kukopa kwanza, nimeridhika, ndio baadaye niangalie mtu mwingine. Na hivi ndio Mheshimiwa serikali kuu inavyofanya, kwamba serikali nyingi za kaunti zikitaka kukopa, kwa sababu lile deni ambalo litakopwa na serikali za kaunti litachangia lile deni la kitaifa, na likichangia deni la kitaifa ina maana kwamba ile nafasi ya serikali kuu kukopa itakuwa imepungua kwa sababu ya deni ambalo limekopwa na serikali zetu za kaunti. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ipo haja ya kuweza kuwa na mazungumzo tuweze kujua ni asilimia gani ya kiwango cha deni itakuwa linakopwa na serikali za kaunti na asilimia gani inakopwa na serikali za kitaifa, kwa sababu lazima serikali za kaunti pia zipate fursa ya kufanya miradi ya maendeleo bila ya kushurutishwa ama kuzuiliwa kwa njia moja au nyingine. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa kumalizia nasema kwamba mswada huu tunaunga mkono, lakini marekebisho lazima yafanywe, kwamba iondolewe ile nafasi ya kuripoti kwa bunge la kitaifa peke yake. Lazima kama ni ripoti, kama tunavyojadili mswada huu kwa sasa, ni lazima ripoti ziletwe katika mabunge yote mawili, bunge la kitaifa na bunge la seneti. Mheshimiwa Spika, la pili ni kwamba uwezo wa waziri kukopa alafu baadaye ndio ajaulize kibali kutoka kwa bunge, hiyo pia hatukubaliani nayo, kwa sababu ina maana kwamba tutakuwa tumempa uhuru wa kupita kiasi waziri wa kuweza kukopa, ambao itakuwa ni kinyume na maslahi ya nchi yetu ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, na mwisho ni kwamba lazima tuwe na mjadala kuhusiana na mambo mawili ya ofisi huru ya deni, an independent public debt office, na pili tuwe tunajua kwamba ni asilimia ngapi ya deni ambayo serikali za county zinaweza kukopa na ni asilimia gani ambayo serikali ya kitaifa inaweza kukopa, kwa sababu zote ni serikali na zote zina mapato na zote zina haja ya kufanya maendeleo katika nyanja tofauti tofauti katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika, naunga mkono lakini kwa masharti hayo ambayo nimeyazungumza. Asante.
Thank you very much, Senator Faki. Senator Mugatana Danson Buya.
So Speaker, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a brief contribution. Mr. Speaker, I want to associate myself with the comments and the contributions of previous speakers, so I will not repeat. I will just say that I fully agree with the contributions with regard to the question of the standing of the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I think that was a mistake. And also, Mr. Speaker, about the data anchor, I fully endorse those submissions that have been made with honorable speakers who have spoken to this bill. Mr. Speaker, the point I wanted to make, which is slightly different from what the preceding speakers have said, is that we are only discussing the question of procedure of how to report the debt, how to manage the debt, how to be responsible holders of public debt. But Mr. Speaker, I think this is also an opportunity for us to speak to Treasury about debt in itself. Mr. Speaker, I know there's a theory about growing in debt, development through debt. But Mr. Speaker, the debt levels in this country are not sustainable at all. And we need to seriously speak about this. This is an opportunity for us to debate this issue. Mr. Speaker, the debt that is accumulated in the public space comes because of excessive spending. Government that goes into debt, into deficits, is because, Mr. Speaker, they are spending more than what they are generating. That deficit, Mr. Speaker, that happens in this financial year, it adds to the public debt stock that we have. And Mr. Speaker, nobody from the Treasury has come out strongly to tell us these are the measures we are putting down as a nation to cut down on public debt. Mr. Speaker, this is a debate that we must have. We must talk, and the Senate will use this opportunity to tell Treasury, Mr. Speaker, that the levels of public debt are worrying. They are worrying, and we are not hearing positive voices from the Treasury telling how they will manage. They must come out with a plan, Mr. Speaker. Where we are now, it is bad. Whether you say we are going to report debt using the 10 trillion absolute figure or public debt to GDP ratio, you're still not telling us or giving us confidence as Kenyans that you want to manage public debt and the plan that you have to manage the public debt. Treasury is too quiet, Mr. Speaker. And I think the Senate must use this floor to explain to the Treasury that this administration, one of the promises that we were going to control public debt, we are going to reduce public debt, but we don't hear a concrete plan. Instead, Mr. Speaker, what we are hearing is we want to be reporting, this is the way we want to report the debt here in every year. They are not telling us what should happen. Mr. Speaker, we want to hear a strong voice on spending cuts, Mr. Speaker. We want to hear how they will reduce this deficit, Mr. Speaker. They must tell us where they are going to cut off so that we can reduce and live within our means. Mr. Speaker, the President has spoken many times about living within our means. But the lieutenants who are supposed to actualize these words are not telling us what the plan is, Mr. Speaker. So the Senate will take this opportunity when they have brought this to tell them we are not happy, the plan is not clear, and we are not seeing what they are doing to reduce the public debt. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, people are watching us. Kenyans are watching us. In 4 years, we'll have to explain whether we reduced the public debt as we promised or what we did when we had the opportunity to do so. And Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is not rocket science. They must cut down on the spending. Mr. Speaker, Canada in the 1990s had a huge deficit, and they did it. Mr. Speaker, 20% spending cuts. They did it within a period of 4 years. And Mr. Speaker, in 3 years, the public debt went down to 0. And Mr. Speaker, within 4 years, the public debt to GDP ratio went to less. They reduced their own public debt by 1/3. We are asking, Mr. Speaker, that Treasury speaks to this issue because it is worrying to all of us. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, we support these amendments which have been brought with the amendments that have been proposed by previous Speaker. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Eddie Gisharu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to actually also be able to share some thoughts on this particular bill. And Mr. Speaker, as I had told the substantive speaker, I'm grateful to be back in the House and to be able to contribute to the House. And I don't want to forget to thank the people of Migori for the support they have given me in the last 3.5 months that I've been unwell. They sent me to this house, but they've also been very courteous to me when I was in my lowest moment. So I want to take this opportunity to thank them. And I thank them because I'm also glad that during that time, I was able to engage appropriately with the committee that their vote enabled me to be part of, which is the Committee of, on Finance and Budget of the Senate. And with that regard, also I want to thank so much the chair of the committee, Senator Captain Ali Roba, who has actually enabled us to, for the first time, engage very soberly with the National Treasury on this issue pertaining the debt burden of our country. Mr. Speaker, I think that most of my thoughts and most of my alignment in terms of support to this bill were definitely, echoed in the report and therefore the bill that has been tabled here while we're in the committee. However, there are some aspects of this bill that I think that is important that I do emphasize on. And I want to start with probably where my senior brother, Senator Danson Mungatana, started with on the issue of deficit. Mr. Speaker, I do understand the concern that my brother has on the issue of deficit. But I want to be more liberal in this thought of deficit because, government is not a trading entity to the extent that we are always going to have a deficit if you're going to be in government. The question then is what actually constitutes your deficit? If your deficit is actually more towards the issue of development, then it's a worthy deficit. But if it's the issue of more consumption and what we are seeing as paying bills in this country, whereby over 62% of our government spending goes to paying recurrent budgets, then that's a problem. And then the second bit of it that I wanted to emphasize, because it might water down this bill, is the issue of where then do you finance that deficit. If you borrow from outside the country, it sometimes makes it easier than if you borrow within the country, which then leads to crowding out. So this bill, if I were to perhaps refrain the essence of it, is actually a debt relief bill. Having a debt is okay, but when you have debt that you can't manage, then it says that you have to actually have a relief mechanism. And the bill is at the essence of actually being able to realize that as a country, we need to manage the debt. It's not that we have a problem with having the debt. And for the time, Mr. Speaker, we actually went through all the options that we have to be able to manage our debt. I do appreciate, honestly, and in Kiswahili they say, mugala muue lakini haki mpe. I think that we sat with the chairman of the budget committee. We went through every tool that economically makes sense with the minister, or rather the CS for finance, Professor Juguna, and I do appreciate him, and looked at all the options that are available for us to manage our debt, starting from things like how can we engage on interest reduction. And Mr. Speaker, we came and looked at issues around how do we even need perhaps to change the terms of our loans to be able to manage this debt, Mr. Speaker? Or do we need to even think about the classical idea of reducing the principle around debt issues in this country? Or do we even need perhaps to consolidate the debt in this country, Mr. Speaker? Or even the more classical ones is people trying to refinance their loans, Mr. Speaker. When we looked at all these things, Mr. Speaker, it became eminent that we were able to interrogate the single problem in our debt management in this country. And the problem, as articulated by this bill, Mr. Speaker, is what we call the metric discipline, whereby people who came before us, who are parliamentarians, when they think about going for debt, you come up with an absolute number, and then you cap that we want to borrow up to 10 trillion. But then what you lose the sight of is that if this 10 trillion was to be subjected into your economic capacity, which is otherwise called GDP, then what does it come up to? And that is how we came up to realizing that our debt situation is 64.1% of our GDP. Why? Because we started by putting a number without realizing where do we stand in terms of our GDP. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, this debt relief bill is going to help us to actually objectively put this debt borrowing mechanism of 55% as a percentage of GDP in its net present value, meaning that at any given time that we look at our GDP and we want to borrow as a country, then you're looking at what is our GDP at that particular time in point, at that particular point in time, and then you go 55% of that, Mr. Speaker. I find this brilliant, Mr. Speaker, because it then helps us to be able to put it as a performance metric. And Mr. Speaker, this is going to enable us to do three things which are very important for this country to be able to manage our debt. Number one, Mr. Speaker, if in any case that we find that our economy is contracting, then it will mean that the percentage remains, and therefore the borrowing become a constant, and therefore it also contracts. This is brilliant, Mr. Speaker, because that is the mechanism that actually will be able to help us manage a debt that we cannot be able to deal with. But the good thing is that the vice versa is also standing, in the sense that if the economy does expand, therefore, Mr. Speaker, then it means that the gap that you have, the window of borrowing that you also have, will also have to expand. And that, therefore, will mean that it will be a development matrix that actually forces you to start thinking about borrowing within some priority items, which for me, I think will be very developmental. But also, if you think about it, we are having exchequer receipts that every single day, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the week, the Treasury has to think about paying for interest, Mr. Speaker. So if we go with this metrics, Mr. Speaker, it will also mean that that also remains the same and true for interest. When the economy contracts, and the interest will also contract because we are pegging this to a percentage of our GDP rather than an absolute value. Mr. Speaker, lastly, and this is what I wanted to invite the House to actually think about critically. You see, when we discussed this with the Treasury and the Minister for the CS for Finance, we then told him that then, if this is a good idea, how then do we come with a compliance plan? And in this bill, Mr. Speaker, the Minister, together with our committee, worked very strongly to come actually with absolute values. Because we are saying in this bill that if we choose these metrics, then how do we come from that 64.1% down to a manageable level of this 55% now that we can constantly go with? And Mr. Speaker, we have a compliance plan in this bill, whereby we are saying that by 2024, this will have reduced to 61.8%. And this is a target we have given the Treasury, and we can be able to hold them accountable as a House, and also as Parliament, together the National Assembly. By 2025, we are proposing here that then it will go to 60.1. By 2026, take it down to 58.2. And then by 2027, automatically go to 55%, Mr. Speaker, as envisaged in this amendment. So I find it to be brilliant, Mr. Speaker, and as I finished, Mr. Speaker, the bill does recognize and does appreciate does appreciate the elements of Article 214. And Article 214, Mr. Speaker, is anchoring the fundamentals of houses of Parliament to be able to speak of when does the Treasury and the Ministry able to go out of the established premises of this bill, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we have got an exceptional clause. The fact that if you have got exceptional circumstances where we need to borrow out of what we have set as a country, then we can be able to actually go back and review. And these exogenous factors, Mr. Speaker, are obvious. We've seen them in national and global occurrences. Globally, we have seen sometimes things like currencies that we are trading on, sometimes being very volatile because of different challenges, Mr. Speaker. So in case whereby we have got a runaway exchange rate because the currencies that we are trading on have caused a devaluation of our own currency, Mr. Speaker, then it is natural economically to be able to come back to the House and seek permission to go beyond our regulation. Mr. Speaker, we have got instances that we have seen in this country, COVID-19, for instance, a variety of nature that caused a lot of staggering elements in the issues around debt management. we can review it at that point, Mr. Speaker. In terms of war, Mr. Speaker, we can end up being in a war situation, whether with an external country or within the country, that necessitates that we have to review our debt management, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, we have seen in this country instances of nature like a time of famine and a time of locust invasion in this country, Mr. Speaker, where if you don't adjust on what you can be able to borrow, then you can end up mismanaging the economy. So, Mr. Speaker, with this kind of proper proposition on debt relief and debt management, I want to urge the House that this is the first time that this committee that is called the Committee on Finance and Budget of this House, together with the National Assembly and together with the ministry, have actually thought more scientifically of how we manage our debt. And I want to urge my colleagues that we support this bill because it gives us a compliance plan that we go with and be able to assess whether we are making progress. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all the colleagues who have contributed, and I hope that we can be able to make sure that this bill goes through. Otherwise, I thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Eddie. And I would like to applaud you for taking your time off the hospital bed and the demands of the condition you are in to be in the House. I can see from my request, I still have got Senator Okongo Mogeni and Senator Olekina Ledama. Senator Mogeni.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for also giving me an opportunity to make a contribution to this proposed amendment to the Public Finance Management Act. Mr. Speaker, we know that globally, whether you go to the United States of America, even if it's Africa, you go to South Africa, one of the strongest economies, governments do borrow. I think that's a global accepted phenomena in managing finances of countries. So when, as a country, we are trying to put in place a framework that will be predictable on how our government will borrow, it's a good thing. There is no doubt about that, Mr. Speaker. So we are here to support the amendment which is on the floor, but of course with some few concerns to raise. Mr. Speaker, when the Kenya Constitution was enacted by the people of Kenya, 2010, the Senate was left with a very weak legislative mandate, Mr. Speaker. And I've always made this argument, Mr. Speaker, that when you read the 2010 Constitution, there are two things that you easily discern. Mr. Speaker, there are roles that are reserved for Parliament. And when the Constitution mentions the word Parliament, it means the legislative mandate is co-shared by the National Assembly and by the Senate. Mr. Speaker, where the drafters of this Constitution intended a legislative mandate to be a preserve of the National Assembly, that has also been provided for specifically in this Constitution. And then there is the other approach where under Article 93, 94, 95, 96, the mandates of the houses have been limited specifically in the Constitution. Now, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to this issue of national debt, borrowing by national government, my argument has always been, Mr. Speaker, that this is a mandate that is co-shared by the two houses. And Mr. Speaker, we know the practice in the Commonwealth. If there is a practice that has been followed by a House of Parliament successfully in each year, then that acquires the force of law, Mr. Speaker. Last time I remember, we were here as a Senate engaged in a serious debate on raising the debt ceiling. That was considered by the National Assembly and the Senate. So we must guard, Mr. Speaker, we must guard any attempt of taking away that mandate from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. Because if you read plainly the provisions of Article 211, it starts by saying Parliament may, by legislation, prescribe the terms on which the national government may borrow, impose reporting requirements. So, on the plain reading of Article 211, Mr. Speaker, there is no way a proposed legislation can limit the reporting obligation to be preserved of the National Assembly. That we should never allow. And I hope the chair, whom I have commended many times, has made an appropriate amendment to ensure that that mandate remains a mandate of the two houses. Anything short of that, Mr. Speaker, will be unconstitutional. And you know, the Supreme Court has made so many pronouncements, especially in Advisory Opinion 2 of 2013. It says it is actually us as a house, through our Speaker, that can give away our legislative mandate. The argument of the Supreme Court is that virtually each and every legislation affects counties. Why am I saying so, Mr. Speaker? Even if you go back to borrowing, we all know, Mr. Speaker, that our national debt is always the first charge when we come to sharing our revenue. The debt must be removed first. Whatever remains is what we share. So if we allow our government to borrow, you know, in a manner that is not properly managed, it means we will not have enough money to share to our counties. And these things we say here, Mr. Speaker, at times we say them jokingly, but they come back to bite us. Just on Thursday, if you recall, on this floor, I did mention that our governors should take issues of health facilities seriously. I said it on Thursday. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, my 3 MCAs who were traveling from Nyamira to attend a meeting in Nairobi got involved in a road accident just before Mayu, Mr. Speaker. And one of the MCAs, our majority leader, waited for over 1 hour to get help. And the ambulance that was called took more than 2 hours, Mr. Speaker. More than 2 hours. We lost him. We lost him, Mr. Speaker. Listen to this. When they were taken to level 4 hospital in Naivasha, Mr. Speaker, Naivasha County Referral Hospital, level 4, has got no CT scan. There is no MRI machine in that hospital. It took us to look for ambulances from AAR Nairobi to go all the way to Naivasha to bring those MCAs to Aga Khan Hospital. So, Mr. Speaker, anytime we discuss issues that affect money that will be available to counties, we should always proceed with caution, Mr. Speaker. That's why I always say, Mr. Speaker, any legislation that we are passing today, warn yourself that these consequences could be at your doorstep tomorrow. You never know. Because what I learned yesterday is that from Narok all the way to Nairobi, there is no any government facility along that way, or along the entire stretch of Narok to Nairobi that can save somebody involved in a serious road accident. And that's why we always keep arguing that if we get an opportunity to share money to counties, let us give counties enough money that can assist them in giving the important devolved functions to the people. So going back, Mr. Speaker, to the proposed shift, that we have now created under this bill, which is to base our borrowing on GDP growth. I still maintain that we are moving too fast. We are copying the West. We are picking best practices from the West. Yet our economy, when you're talking about our economy, you know, let's not pick abstract theories from the West and impose it on us before we do careful examination. Mr. Speaker, if you read about debt, international debt, the US has one of the, I think, the largest debt portfolio in the world. But look at the economy. The economy of California alone is more than the economy of the African continent. So when you base their borrowing on GDP, you cannot go wrong. But now look at, a country like Kenya. If we are not careful, especially if you get a government that has a very high appetite for borrowing, I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that some of the functions that are devolved, including healthcare, water, would suffer because it will be very, very hard to give adequate resources to the counties. Mr. Speaker, imagine, and I'm not laying any blame to the previous government. Mr. Speaker, imagine if we did not have the kind of data that we had. We would not have had quarrels on this idea of how much money we should give to counties. If our debt portfolio was down, counties would have gotten more than 407 billion. But now we are fighting because, Mr. Speaker, a huge chunk of the revenue that we collect as a country goes to servicing debt. That's the reality, Mr. Speaker. If that debt portfolio was properly managed by the previous regimes, we'll be having more than enough money to send to our counties. And remember, by passing this legislation, you're going to give almost a blank check to the government of the day on borrowing. No. Yeah? You want to inform me? 2:11. No, my time is not up. My time is still there. So the point I'm making is that anybody, even if it's me, who is president, maybe that time will come. If I'm a president today, and I know that I'm not under the watchful eye of Parliament as an institution, I'll borrow carelessly, Even when I go to the bank today, if I have a blank check, I'll borrow carelessly. But when I know that the bank will be careful to ensure that I don't borrow more than 30% of my net,
Senator
my non-net
Okongo
income.
Mogeni, it is now 6:30 p.m. and the chair seeks to invoke the provisions of Standing Order 34 2A and extend the sitting of the House for not more than 15 minutes.
Okay.
So I hope you're closing your contribution so that we permit
So then let me wind up so that the chair
Ledama to contribute,
yes,
and the chairperson of finance to reply.
Mm-hmm. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, the most important point why I really chose to contribute today is to ensure that we protect the legislative mandate of the Senate, that we should never cede to the National Assembly, because that will be violating clear provisions of the Constitution. If that is taken care of by Chair, Mr. Speaker, I'll be comfortable to support this proposed amendment, but with a caution that giving the government of the day a blank check on borrowing without Parliament acting as a check is a very dangerous route, which we should not take. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Omogeni. Senator Ledama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this bill. I think it's important that we instill fiscal discipline in our management of public resources. Mr. Speaker, I was sitting down here and I was having a conversation with the chair of the Finance and Budget, and that's what made me actually contribute to these amendments. One of the things that made me feel very happy about this amendment is the fact that we are now defining the term parliament the way it ought to be defined. Parliament, the meaning of parliament. You know, a lot of people out there would say parliament. And in that case, they would be referring to the lower house. But parliament is both houses. It is the Senate and the National Assembly. And the fact that you are now requiring anything that has to do with the public debt to be considered by both houses is something that you're beginning to recognize the importance of the county governments. Mr. Speaker, we talk about, one of the amendments talks about this issue of the debt ratio to the GDP. If you look at, anyone goes out there and Google currently and say what is the debt ratio to GDP for the country of Kenya, the figures that we have dates back to December 2022, which is at 67% of the debt ratio. Now, if this amendment, which is now being proposed, so that by the year 2027, the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Treasury would be able to lower this down to 55%, it is something that I can actually be able to support. And if you look at already, the figures that have been given and have been calculated by the committee, it has come down to 64.1%, which means there is a slight downward trend of about 3%. What is important, Mr. Speaker, is that as a country, we now have to learn on how to live within our means. You know, whenever I hear people talking about this bottom-up economics model, I actually tend to believe that none of them really understand what it is. It is just a beautiful phrase that you end up using it and you say, this is it. But the reality of it, if you go down and you define what that bottom-up should actually mean, it should be defined in a way that it creates employment, number one. It ensures that at least every county ensure a fiduciary responsibility. Earlier on, Mr. Speaker, we are debating, there was a statement which had been brought here about the issue a greater definition of pending bills contributes to the issue of public debt. Because if our counties, the management of resources in our counties do not ensure fiduciary responsibility, even to a greater extent, the discipline in the national government will continue plunging this country further into debt. We have serious crisis. And I hope that we don't just come here and we speak very good English, we define whatever we want to define. Like if you look at the Constitution as an example, this is a very interesting time. Nowadays, Mr. Speaker, you know, we read too much, such that our eyes get disrupted. That's why now we have to wear glasses. But if you look at the Constitution, the framers of the Constitution envision a situation where we ensure fiduciary responsibility, both in the national government and the county government. If you look at Article 211, Mr. Speaker, all the way down to Article 214, that talks about the public debt, borrowing. 211 talks about within 7 days, after either House of Parliament, we have no time for point of orders, we only have 5 minutes, you can talk later. Within 7 days after either House of Parliament so request by resolution, the Cabinet Secretary responsible for finance shall present to the relevant committee information concerning any particular loan or guarantee, including all information necessary to show. So, Mr. Speaker, if I read Article 211.2 in line with now 214.2, which is what this amendment is meant for, then I would hope that this Committee of Finance shall not just rush in and bring in amendments to the PFM Act. Because if you ask me, Mr. Speaker, in fact, we ought to have amended the PFM Act entirely to be able, there are certain provisions in the PFM Act which people are not able to implement. I dare say, and I want the chairperson to listen, that if you look at Section 109 of the PFM Act, if you go from Section 109 all the way to 116, when it comes to the issue of ONSO's revenue, funds accounts, if the committee can look at this, they would have been able to amend those and made it very easy for counties to be able to work. I sit in the CPIC, and we go through accounts, and you realize that the capacity of most governors and also the accounting officers is wanting when it comes to the issue of ensuring a fiduciary responsibility. Some of them say, you require us to implement the PFM Act, and it is very difficult for us to do that, because if you go back and you look at the county government regulations, PFM Act 2015, most counties and also most practices disregarded saving clauses. There are things that used to happen before. You still have time. I think I've done 8 minutes, so I'm giving you 2 minutes. I'm finishing in 1 minute. Most saving clauses, in fact, are only put in the Lands Act. There are counties that used to collect revenue in a certain way. They disregarded that, and the PFM Act did not. So I want to employ upon the committee chair and his able member to look at the entire PFM Act, not just to rush in and say, oh, we want to just deal with the issue of the public debt, changing from national debt to public debt. I think it is imperative that you now look at the entire financial management of this country, from counties and the national government. Mr. Speaker, because of time, I support.
Thank you, Senator Olekina.
Yes,
I now call upon the mover to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to reply. I have listened to a lot of contribution from my colleagues in various issues. They've raised some issues of critical concern to them as it relates to amendments that is proposed for the bill. One of the amendments that they are concerned with is the issue of reporting public debt. Is it going to be only at National Assembly, or it's going to be to both houses? That is one of our amendments, that it should be to Parliament, meaning both houses. On the issue of prudence, is this amendment proposed going to give Mr. Speaker the CS National Treasury the free will to borrow as he sees fit? The answer to that question is really, when our current debt ceiling is translated to percentage of the current GDP, our debt ceiling stands at 64.1%. Actually, what the amendment proposed in this bill is much more restrictive than where we are at currently. And the bill goes further to give the CS National Treasury 5 years to comply, to bring down the GDP, the public debt to GDP to within 55% of the GDP. And the National Treasury is given 5 years. So by 2027, they should have brought it down from 64.1% to 55%. Mr. Speaker, sir, and we've engaged in public participation extensively, CS Treasury. Honorable Senator, for Narok, my brother Olekina, we have engaged very extensively as to how the CES and the National Treasury intends, because the object of the bill is to be able to manage public debt ceiling. Arbitrarily in the past, it was a request, and then we give an absolute number based on nothing. This is what has been happening. And we say 10 trillion, 9 trillion, and maybe based on that trajectory, maybe Treasury would have come and requested 12 trillion as an absolute ceiling. But based on what? It must be based on some scientific data that is able to put a self-restrictive limitation where borrowing is limited within 55% of the GDP, and when the performance of the economy grows, then the borrowing window expands. If the performance reduces, the borrowing window reduces because it's a percentage of the GDP. And when we engage the CS Treasury on how from 64.1, he plans to bring it down. What is contained in budget policy statement and has been very consistent, Honorable Speaker, is the CS has proposed that in 2024, by the end of the 2023-2024 financial year, he intends to bring it down from 64.1 to 61.8. And then by the end of 2024-2025, further down from 61.8 to 60.1. And in 2025-2026, further down to 58.2, and finally by 2027, which is the window given to bring it down to within 55% of the GDP. Then the onus is upon National Treasury and CS National Treasury to make sure the performance of the government in terms of GDP growth is realized as it is. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I reply, you know, this critical issue obligates with prudence National Treasury, CS National Treasury to be able to make sure that every time a borrowing is suggested, it will be based on that absolute present value of the performance of the GDP of the government to be able to determine that. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to reply, and Honorable Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order number 66-3, I beg that the putting of the question be put to a later date, and I reply. Thank you.
Honorable members. Before we adjourn, we will defer the putting of the question to tomorrow when the House will resume, pursuant to the request that has been made by the Chair and in cognizance of the fact that we do not have the requisite numbers to do that. Honorable members, it is now, having invoked the provisions of Standing Order 34-2A earlier on, it is now 6:45 p.m. Time to adjourn the Senate, and the Senate therefore stands adjourned until Wednesday, tomorrow, 9th August 2023 at 9:30 a.m.